Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the committee's 27th meeting in 2019. Could I ask you, please, to make sure your mobile phones are on silent? We have received apologies today from Jamie Green and Stuart Stevenson, and I'd like to welcome their substitutes, Finlay Carson and Christine Graham. Finlay, you haven't been to the committee before, and I wondered if there were any interests you want to declare at this meeting.
Just declare as a former partner in a farming business.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. The committee is asked to consider taking item 4 in private. Item 4 is allow us a chance to review today's evidence session. Are members agreed on this? That is agreed. The second item on the agenda is subordinate legislation. This item is to consider one negative instrument as detailed in the agenda. No motions to annul or representations have been received in relation to this instrument. Does any member have any comment? It appears not. So is the committee agreed that it does not wish to make comment to make any recommendation in relation to the instrument? We are agreed. We then move on to agenda item 3, which is pre-budget financial scrutiny on roads maintenance in Scotland. Today we'll take evidence from 2 panels, firstly from the road users and then from decision makers on the efficacy of the current approach to road maintenance in Scotland and the adequacy of current associated expenditure levels. This activity will support the committee's scrutiny of the Scottish Government's draft budget 2021 later in the year. And I'd like to welcome the first panel, Keith Robertson, who's the lead member of the Roads, Infrastructure and Active Travel Workstream Mobility and Access Committee in Scotland. I'd like to welcome Martin Reid, Policy Director, Scotland and Northern Ireland, the Road Haulage Association, David Sullivan, the Deputy Chief Executive of the Confederation of Forest Industries, and Alistair Speedy, the Timber Transport Forum. Paul White, the Director of the Confederation of Passenger Transport, Ian McCall, the Senior Development Officer, Pass for All, and Keith Irvine, as he arrives, who is the Senior Development, is the Chief Executive of Cycling Scotland. Appropriate that you were clutching your cycling helmet. We are going to move straight on to questions. Just before we do that, can I just say that it's quite a big panel today, and my intention is always to get everyone in to ask questions. So you don't, for those of you that have been before, you know you don't have to push your red button. I'll call you in. Catch my eye if you want to come in. And if there's a difficult question, don't be the last one to look away, because you'll be the one that gets asked to answer it. If I'd also ask you just please to keep your eye generally in my direction, so if I feel that you're going off on a bit of a tangent or maybe stopping somebody else come in, I can try and encourage you to wind up on that question. So thank you. And the first question is from John Finney. John.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, panel, and thank you for your written submissions. The committee's heard that the current levels of investment in the local road maintenance is unlikely to prevent further deterioration of the network. I wonder if the panel agree with that assessment, and if so, how much you think should be invested and where it should come from, the funds.
Alistair, you're looking up. I don't know if that means you want to go for it, but you are now on.
Right, thank you very much, Chair, and a very good morning to ladies and gentlemen of the committee. Yes, I would agree that investment in the local road networks has diminished over the years. How much is needed in the future is a very difficult question to answer. I think we have to start from the base and look forward and where we exist at the moment. And there is no doubt that if budgets do continue to diminish, then the roads will continue to deteriorate. There needs to be a real understanding that the local road network is the basic foundation for everything. We can't get to the shops, we can't get to the hospitals, we can't get to education, we can't get to work, we can't have a successful industry. So a good basic road network is absolutely essential for the economic well-being of the country. In the timber industry, where we use the very, very minor roads because the forests are by nature remote, it's key that that industry survives, and to do that we need a road network that can support the wagons that have to take the timber from the forests to the market. We do that at the moment in a huge partnership, a huge collaboration, working together to sustain the network rather than expenditure on the network. And what I mean by that is that the regimes that are used to take timber to the market...
I'm not going to stop you too much on timber, because I know there is a member who wants to particularly delve greater into the issue of timber extraction. Maybe, Martin, would you like to come in on that from your point, and then John Finney, if you'd like to develop that slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. What we find in general is that the trunk road network tends to be better maintained than the local authority roads network. Now, we understand that the local authorities are under tremendous budgetary constraints, but we tend to find that the deterioration or the hardest part of the journey is often what we would refer to as the last mile. Now, that for our industry, and I guess I can speak at this level for the timber transport as well, that the road deterioration leads to additional costs for the hauliers through wear and tear, additional strain on the tyres, etc. And so, yeah, I would echo Alistair's opinion that we need at least the same, if not more, investment, particularly in the rural roads, than we currently have. We have to remember as well that it's accessing communities as well. So it's the economic side of things is obviously incredibly important, but it's also providing lifelines for communities that would otherwise be ignored or are more vulnerable than some in the urban setup.
What do you want to come in?
I just echo a lot of what Martin was saying. I mean, when road maintenance issues increase operating costs for bus companies, as they do for freight, and that can be the critical point when it comes to marginal services in rural areas. Look at the West Coast Motors evidence they submitted. They suggested there was a 10% increase in operating costs in the last 5 years that they suggested was down to road maintenance issues and the standard of the road network. How much should be invested and where should it come from? I think I assumed from the last evidence session that the backlog is around about 2 billion, and where should that come from? Well, dare I say there should be maybe an element of ring fencing for local authority budgets, and a 10 to 20 year plan that addresses that in the coming decades.
Ian?
Yes, just from our perspective, our submission focused on the needs of walking and cycling and where that figures in the maintenance budgets. One of the issues is that it's very hard to find out how much is actually spent on footpaths and cycle path maintenance. It's clear that if we want to encourage people to walk and cycle, we need to maintain footpaths. At the moment, we don't really know what we're maintaining, and one of the issues is I think that you measure what's important. If we don't measure it, that suggests we don't think it's important. The National Walking Strategy has an action for local authorities to monitor footpath status, and therefore that could lead on to making decisions on budget. That hasn't so far happened. That's something we'd like to flag up.
John, do you want to...
Well, it's my experience that the public don't necessarily understand the fine points of who has responsibilities for the trunk road network and the local road network. It's certainly the case that the central government, with responsibility for that trunk road network, is expanding that network. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that balance, if it's appropriate. You know, I think the example given of an extension to the house when you've not maintained the existing property.
You don't, sorry, Keith, you missed the pre-brief.
Yep.
Don't touch the button, somebody will do it for you.
Firstly, apologies for my late arrival due to a real maintenance problem, ironically enough. No, perfectly maintained. Obviously, you as a committee and the government have to take decisions about prioritisation. But I think I agree with the member's question that decisions on expanding trunk road capacity when there is a £1.8 billion backlog, according to the best figures available, I think those two things need to be looked at together and not independently. From the cycling point of view, it is very much an issue of spend to save. The people cycling depend on the local roads, most of all, so the deteriorating condition is likely to lead to an increase in serious injury crashes, which obviously has a cost to the individual and also the public purse through health costs as well.
Keith.
Thank you, Convener. The condition of the roads, predominantly local roads, is fundamental to the very well-being of people with disabilities, older people. And if the roads are not in good condition, roads including pavements, obviously, whether that be on motorised utes and trunk roads or local roads, are barriers that lead to isolation. If a person can't get out of their home, they become isolated. And there's plenty of research that isolation, without exception, leads to a quick and marked deterioration in mental health. That being the case, it is a spend to save, because if we spend in the Roads Authority, it will ultimately save in the health budget. We got to look at the door-to-door journey, not just, can we get in a bus, can we get in a train? We need to look, is from someone's house, and actually is the house suitable for them, which is nothing to do with this committee, but from the house to the point of destination and all parts in between, to reduce that isolation. And it is a real problem. We believe that if, for the best will in the world, we can't just make everything accessible at one swoop. But if it's done during a planned maintenance programme, then it makes sense. It may cost a little extra then, but it will be relatively small in comparison to going out and making half a mile of pavement accessible, during planned maintenance. Why not? But people don't listen.
John, before you go on to your next bit, Mike wants to come in, and then I'll come back to you if I may. Mike.
Thanks, Convener. Of course, this is pre-budget scrutiny, so last week's panel couldn't tell us, other than anecdotally, how much was supposed to be spent on road maintenance and how much was being spent on road maintenance, and nobody would come up with a figure. But the only person so far that's come up with a figure is Paul White. Paul, with your evidence just now, when you said there was a backlog of £2 billion. So what I'd like to know really is, that sounds a very round figure. Can you give us a little bit more detail of that, over what period of time? And can anybody on the panel give us an indication of the actual figures? Because that's what we need to focus on. What should be spent on road maintenance? Is all the money going on road maintenance? We all say not enough is going on, but that applies everywhere. The government has an idea of how much should go on. Is it being spent on it? And over what period is this backlog?
I took that figure from evidence submitted by Transform Scotland, who I believe is on your second panel. So they may be able to provide you with more detail on that. I think it's difficult to know exactly how much is spent because it's part of the block grant, isn't it? And it may be not spent. The money that comes from Scottish Government may not end up being spent on road maintenance. So I'm afraid I can't give you that figure.
Ian.
I don't have an absolute figure, but in doing a response, I came across a figure that councils have cut road maintenance budgets by 20% over the last 7 years, and that was from the Improvement Service benchmarking report. And also that spending on local roads had declined 26% in real terms the last 5 years, and that was again from the Improvement Service. So I don't have an absolute figure, but that's an indication of the way things are going.
Thank you. John, sorry, back to you.
Well, maybe I don't know if Mr Reid or Mr Speedy wanted to comment, Convener, on the balance, because clearly you'll use both sets of roads, and There will always be demands for new roads, and funnily enough, if you build new roads, people drive on them, but we're not maintaining. So about that balance, could either of you comment on that, please?
I think it's absolutely appropriate that strategic decisions are made to improve the network and add to it. The strategic network, being the trunk roads, supports many high populated areas, it supports industry, etc. And I think it's appropriate to build new roads for that reason. That's very much, I would imagine, the capital expenditure side. What needs to happen is that appropriate money is also laid aside for the maintenance side. If you build a greenhouse, you have to have sufficient resources to clean the windows. And in the past, maintenance budgets have been cut and maintenance programmes have been stretched. And for example, if I give another improvement example, cycleways, for example, loads of money to build new cycleways, but in all the grants and money that's made available, there's no money to maintain them. So it adds to the pressure on local authorities to actually stretch their roads maintenance budgets to maintain these as well.
I think it's, Mr. Convener, I think it's worthwhile as well when we're taking the rural context into the equation, is that there's been an awful lot of investment placed in various different sectors. So, for example, the timber transport. There's also been investment in aquaculture, etc. And these tend to be in the remotest parts of Scotland. And if we're spending money on building up effectively a business there and a product that we can take to market, not just in Britain but in Europe, and we're not investing in the service levels in terms of the roads in order to get the product to market, it's kind of a false economy, to my mind anyway. I mean, there will be greater economic brains than me that will comment on that, but that would seem to be, I don't know what the panel think on that, but that would be my thoughts.
Keith, you wanted to come in on that?
It's not only what's spent, it's how it's spent and the quality of the reinstatements or the maintenance. The inspections have a lot to do with it. Local authorities are under huge pressures. You know, I think it's £36 just now they get for per project. Even if that takes 20 inspections, they're still getting £36 for that. It's not even paying the fuel for that inspector. And we constantly seeing like drop curbs that are far too high. They're a barrier, you know. Roads maintenance not being accessible through or round about it because it hasn't been done properly, because inspectors haven't been able to get out. It's a big part of it. We need to, you may have read in the paper, I had an accident myself on a utility reinstatement in Edinburgh Airport. I came flying in my wheelchair head first onto the road because I didn't happen to see it. It sunk because no inspector had been along to check it. So quality is just as important as quantity.
Keith, I think the points you make are very valid, and I think the transport bill, which we looked at quite carefully to do with a lot of these things, hopefully is going to make a difference, and that's coming before Parliament very shortly. So we'll watch, but I take the points you make, and we've listened and heard those before on the committee, but thank you for that. I'm going to actually move on to the next question, which is, Richard, do you want to go on?
Yes, good morning, panel. We're on about figures. We do know some figures. What I've ascertained, there are 30.9 million cars in the UK, 37.5 million vehicles in the UK, between £6 and £7 billion raised in vehicle excise licence for the UK government. It might be interesting to ask them how much Scotland gets off that, £6–7 billion for road maintenance. A number of years ago, an idea was floated that we would remove the vehicle licence and put the cost on fuel. That idea was dumped. But it's now been suggested to committee that current vehicle taxation should be replaced with a national road users charging scheme, so monies raised better reflect the impact of vehicles on the road network. What would be your view on that suggestion?
Head off on that. Keith, I'll let you start.
Yeah. My immediate concern would be for disabled people who may, especially live in the rural areas, may be their only means of transport and more likely to be driving longer distances, and so would be, I think, unfairly taxed on the distance they would be driving because of their need to be able to get out and about. So I would have a concern from that perspective. I think it's the only concern I would have.
Martin, can I bring you in? Could you just clarify something for me? Just because every lorry that goes on the road pays a fee, for an annual fee, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's they pay on road tax alone. They pay about £1,200 a year.
1,200.
1,200. But again, if we're looking at what we get as a country compared to what goes into the UK coffers, then the amount of fuel duty that's paid in the UK is markedly higher than anywhere else in Europe.
And lorries that are not registered in the UK but use UK roads, do they pay any money there at all?
Not in terms of the road tax. No, that goes to the country they're registered in.
Okay. Sorry, who would like to come back on? Sorry, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. I think change is inevitable because of the number of low-emission and electric vehicles on our roads and the increasing numbers. So, as a principle, it's not a new idea. It was the early 60s that road user charging was first identified as a model that could work. I think that as a principle, it's extremely positive that it is paying according to use. It is a common system for other forms of transport. Obviously, there are many issues to resolve, but in terms of tackling the road maintenance backlog, it seems a worthy idea for the committee to consider further. And I would just say it is useful to talk about vehicle excise duty, vehicle emissions duty, because of course road tax doesn't actually exist as a concept since the 1930s.
On that, I mean, my concern is, with what I'm hearing, is it's fine where there's alternative transport, but in rural areas that Keith was suggesting, that if you pay per mile used, the poor people who live in a remote area are going to get stung very hard unless there's a bus, and there aren't always buses. Do you want to?
Well, I would defer to Keith in matters of equality and accessibility. I do have a lot of sympathy for the road user charging arguments. I think when you're looking at not just the impact on the quality of the road, which we're here to discuss today, but also emissions impact, road user charging makes a lot of sense. You would have to support that with alternative means of travel, and that means supporting rural buses and having a network of alternatives available to those who may feel punished by a road user charging system. That's possible under the current regulatory framework and also possible under the regulatory frameworks that are being discussed in the Transport Scotland Bill, that a local authority could support increasing the rural bus service, or can work in partnership with bus operators to deliver a greater service in a rural area, whilst also looking at improving the infrastructure, improving the other steps that might help deliver that service.
Okay, Richard, are you happy?
I'm quite happy with the point about electric cars. Is quite interesting. As they come into vogue, it'll be interesting to see how the government raises the money from fuel duty. That'll be interesting. Thank you.
Peter, you've got some questions you want to ask.
Yeah, good morning, gentlemen. There's a general acceptance that the local authorities are suffering from cuts to road budgets and a lack of funds. But there are many people argue that the best way to deliver the local roads maintenance isn't by the 32 authorities each doing their own thing. And we had some arguments last week that the smaller authorities may lack the expertise and may lack the staff. compared to larger authorities with a hugely bigger road infrastructure to maintain. So basically my question is, we've heard calls for local road maintenance to be organised on a regional basis rather than in each individual local authority doing their own thing. What's your thoughts on that as a suggestion to get possibly better value for money for the spend that we have got?
Martin, you wanted to come in on that?
Anything should be taken off the table. I know, having certainly in my previous life when I worked in construction and we were dealing with the local authorities, trying to get uniformity of approach across the whole gamut of the local authorities was a real problem. And I think that whether it be joint procurement exercises, I know there's been pilots done in the past, and as I said, it's been a few years since I've worked there, but joint procurement exercises could be the way ahead, and I certainly think that it's worth looking at, definitely.
Alistair, you're nodding. Do you want to come in on that?
Yes, I certainly would agree with that. I think collaboration is very, very important, and I think groups of councils should collaborate and should work together. 32 councils all doing roads maintenance is a very large number. In the past there were, I think it was 7 regional councils, and the 7 directors of roads in Scotland were a very powerful body and did well with roads maintenance expenditure. Collaboration, I think, is everything. As I said earlier, Timber Transport Forum is a collaboration, and we've had a lot of success by working and talking and solving problems rather than flinging money at them. So collaboration, I think, is the way forward.
Keith, and then, Keith Irvine, and then Keith Robertson. Sorry to save any confusion.
Thank you. Yes, I think the next panel will obviously be in a far better position to go into that issue in detail, given the Strategic Action Group report that they commissioned, focusing on voluntary collaboration and the fact that 33 roads authorities was, in their view, unsustainable. I think the important point is that reorganisation is not a silver bullet. There is still financial concerns there, but also it's the long-term planning that is needed, not just looking at 1, 3 or 5 year cycles for road maintenance, but actually being able to plan management of the asset over a 10 to 20 year time frame. That would be critical as part of any reorganisation. Because if you look at other forms of transport, trunk roads, major rail developments, they are on a 10 to 20 year cycle, and it's really important that road maintenance and other forms of transport have that long-term planning as well.
Keith Robertson.
I agree with my namesake on the length of the cycles, absolutely. We've had a tried and trusted model of collaboration since the 2-tier council days in Tayside, with Tayside contracts. I believe that they are so successful they can actually feed money back to the 3 local authorities, being Angus, Dundee, City and Perth and Kinross. Every year they're so successful. And that is a collaboration between the 3 authorities originally to form Tayside contracts. And we now have the Ayrshire Alliance that, as far as I know, is working reasonably well. We've been working with this on the roads maintenance stakeholder group with Scots, try to push for this because we see it as a more sensible way forward. Instead of 32 local authorities working independently, surely it makes more sense to collaborate and not stop where one local authority starts and another one begins, but work right through. It makes eminent sense, but there is a problem with the 3 and 5 year cycles that needs to be extended.
Okay. Ian, do you want to come in on that? I mean, are paths maintained to the same standard across all authority areas? Is there scope for collaboration?
It's not an area of expertise, but I don't see any argument against collaboration. There's certainly some evidence that the different local authorities take a different approach. A few years ago, Living Streets did some work looking at spend on footway maintenance, and in fact, I think it was Keith who actually was behind that research, and they found quite a divergence between local authorities. It appeared that Edinburgh spent 31% of its road maintenance budget on pavements, whereas Glasgow seemed to spend 9%. So it may well be they're measuring different things. It may well be they were spending it differently. But I think there's a good reason to have some kind of common approach across the country. So yes, I would agree with that. So.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased to hear that you're basically all saying that this is something that's certainly worth looking at. But I mean, in a practical sense, I can see problems, you know, the way that money is delivered, the block grant is delivered to 32 different local authorities. They all want control over their own lump of money that they get. And in a practical sense, it may be a good idea, but how do we make it work in practice? I mean, I just wonder if anybody has any thoughts on how we can move it forward from a general idea to actually working in practice.
David, you wanted to come in, did you?
Convener, just to pick up on 2 points. Certainly, I would absolutely agree with the comments made by colleagues about the value and benefit of collaboration and partnership. That's absolutely right. But coupled to that, I would be wary of a move towards, if I might call it, centralisation, because I think there is a risk of that being a blunt instrument with the inevitable unintended consequences. One of the vital assets that we have in Scotland is the local knowledge of road engineers. And I think I would be right in saying just because we have a number of very large local authorities doesn't necessarily mean that their roads departments are sufficiently resourced to do the job they've got. So it shouldn't be automatically assumed that smaller local authorities are disadvantaged. I think it would be true to say, there are others more competent than I to comment, that the expertise in the Scottish Local Authority Roads Departments is overstretched probably in every case. Coming back to Mr Chapman's point, yes, I mean, there clearly are concerns about the block grant, and understandably there are competing concerns for that money. And it's perhaps not surprising that education or a whole range of issues have a higher priority than roads. And I fear that roads are often viewed as something of a Cinderella and suffer as a consequence when it comes to the dividing up of the block grant. I can well recall when I entered the industry, and I was fortunate enough to hear Alistair Speedy speaking on a number of occasions, his experience going back to the times of what was called hypothecation, where sums of money were set aside for specific expenditure areas, including roads, seemed to resolve a lot of issues. And the backlog that we've heard about today has undoubtedly increased, it seems to me at least, since the end of that hypothecation. And that is perhaps an area where we might usefully revisit, perhaps. Thank you.
Okay.
Else, any ideas as to how we can make it work practically? I mean, as I say, that it's about each local authority wants to control their own budget. So how do we collaborate to spend some of this money in maybe a more useful way?
I don't have a solution in my mind. I've thought about this very carefully. There needs to be another funding model for roads maintenance alone. The block grant with local authorities, it's absolutely appropriate that local authorities have their own priorities through their own strategic plans, their own council plans. And these priorities are very much in the direction of education, care, social services, and they're absolutely commendable. Before that, that included fire and police as well, and that was commendable. The roads maintenance budgets are always the bridesmaids. And I suppose savings can be hidden by longer cycles of maintenance. But we're in the position now where these longer cycles of maintenance are very much coming to the public's attention with the number of potholes we have. And our infrastructure looks tired. You walk in every city and every town, and it does look tired. Now, my view is you don't want to take power away from local politicians. That's where the populace lives, and local decisions are very important. Everybody knows their own area and knows what the priorities are. So I think it's another model for funding. And whether it's road users, I'm not sure. But if there can be some form of setting aside nationally the roads maintenance budget, then we know it's safe. Then we know we can plan long term, because in local authorities, you're on year budgets. You can't plan long term. It's very, very difficult. But every local authority is doing its absolute damn best to spend the money it has and get best value and work very hard at that. And that's been my experience in the last 33 years.
So, Keith Robertson, ring fencing the budgets for road maintenance is...
Yeah, and yeah, going back a number of years when I was local authority councillor, ring fence budgets worked, to be perfectly frank about it. I don't see collaboration as a removal of power away from local authorities. I think there's a two-pronged approach, Mr Chapman, that could be taken. I think to show local authorities that there are tried and proven models out there that they could use, and get the people who are running these models to demonstrate that. I think the other side of that coin is Joe Public out there doesn't know what a road is. They're the very arteries of our society. And if you ask most of the public what a road is, they'll tell you it's a black surface that cars drive on. But actually, that's only a small part of it. They don't understand that all the utilities and everything come underneath the road. You know, and they don't realise that. The ring fencing, yeah, it worked. It protected our roads to an extent, not as much as I would like to have seen, but it did to an extent. And yeah, something has to give somewhere. And just now, what's giving is actually the infrastructure, more potholes, more barriers. You know, reinstatements not being put back properly. Utility companies have been left out of the discussion a little bit. Majority of roads maintenance, roads works are done by utility companies. We need to get them on board a little more than is just now, and have better quality reinstatements.
And Keith, that's an interesting point, which I know Angus wanted to delve into. So I might, Angus, just bring you in now on that particular point and open it up. And Paul, I'll come to you. I know you're after answering that.
Okay, thanks, Convener, and good morning to the panel. Several witnesses that we've heard from have identified the root cause of many road maintenance problems being road authority and utility company procurement focused on minimising the cost of the work undertaken rather than maximising the quality of the work, as Keith Robertson has identified. So, would you agree that you know, well, would you agree with that assertion? And if it's the case, how should it be addressed?
Who'd like to go? Martin.
If I may, I think that the idea of the cheapest bid winning the contract is not just tied down to roads, it's procurement in general. And there's a full review required on this, because the cheapest is very, very rarely the best value when you're looking at a whole of life contract. I'm sure, I can't say for absolute certain, but I know that the civil engineers were speaking to the committee last week, and I would be very surprised if they did not say that preventative maintenance always beats reactive maintenance. And I think if you're what the panel have said in terms of ring fencing would allow the experts, i.e. the civil engineer and contractors, to go about their business, planning ahead and knowing exactly what the workloads are, and be able to put in sensible procurement practices, basically. Because, as I said, right across the board, right across all of procurement within the UK, unfortunately, the lowest price tends to win. And more contracts are set up with 20% value or 20% expertise, 80% on cost. And until that is, there's a whole cottage industry that's sprung up around road maintenance, and going and doing a stick and plaster, going away, coming back and doing the same stick and plaster, 2 or 3 years down the line. And that has become part of business models, and that's wrong. That shouldn't be done.
Interestingly, Martin, I noticed everyone nodding, so I don't know who would also like to come in on and add to that. So, Alice, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, procurement, I think local roads authorities procure to the best of their ability, and when a local road authority is overseeing a job, then we can be assured that it will be inspected, and we can be assured that the quality will be appropriate. As far as the utilities are concerned, the road authorities have no control over their procurement processes, and I'm not convinced that utilities actually supervise their own contractors. These contractors are roaming all over the network. The new Road Streetworks Act is very much different from the old Public Utilities Streetworks Orders Act. When I started off, when I was an area roads engineer, I had complete control over who I could put off the network and keep on the network if the quality of work was not good. But that's not the case now. Road authorities are only allowed a random selection of inspections on these utilities. And road authorities don't dig up their own roads. It's utilities that dig up the roads, and if they're not put back together again, it's like going for an operation. If you're cut open and you're not sewn up correctly, then the road begins to allow in water, frost, freezing, and the road deteriorates, and that's where most of potholes start from these utility works. And again, there are processes through various committees, ROCs, etc., that are supposed to control all that, the Roads Commissioner, and it needs hard work and collaboration to ensure that these processes are being successful. Okay,
Martin and then Keith Irvine.
Thank you, Convener. This has touched on one of my bugbears, I have to say, so forgive me if I'm overtly vocal on this, but firstly I'd like to congratulate Alistair on his analogies. They're brilliant, by the way. There's an awful lot wrong with procurement in general, and what we find, particularly when it comes to looking at the low-cost option, is that there is an unreasonable amount of strain and risk placed on those at the bottom of the supply chain. Now, for our industry as hauliers, the hauliers bear an unreasonable amount of risk within any supply chain, because we've 40% of the costs of any job that they do goes down to fuel. And the credit lines for fuel are a maximum of 7 days, whereas the haulier could wait anything up to 90 days to get paid. So they could have 3 or 4 contracts running concurrently where they've got no chance of getting paid, but they're bankrolling the fund. And that is not just, as I said, for our industry. This is happening right across construction. It's happening right across roads. It's right. So the whole procurement model is a problem, mainly because in certain, well, we look at Carillion and the collapse of Carillion, and that was a real problem because the main contractors were holding on to the monies, they were using cash retention, they were not paying out the subcontractors all the way down, and it took out businesses. So the larger guys were using, because they'd gone in and suicide bidded to get the contract in the first place, zero margins, no profit, just to get the work, then they were using the retention and the money from the subcontractors as their cash flow. And that's happening right across the board. That's not just in our industry, it's right across the board. So your question, Mr MacDonald, is a great question, and it's one that really is at the nub of any maintenance issues that we're doing.
Keith Irvine and then Keith Robertson.
Thank you. Yeah, it was the Mobility and Access Committee who highlighted the sheer importance of the inspection of reinstatements, and in terms of utilities, that is a key priority, and that unfortunately requires local authority capacity to inspect closely and require the work to meet an acceptable standard. There is a particular issue with utilities and manhole covers, and the quality has to be particularly high around there from the point of view of people cycling. Those can create specific hazards. You require to swerve around them, particularly around junctions. You're creating a more hazardous environment, and that comes all the way back to the work of the utilities. And as panel colleagues have said, those have to be focused on extremely tightly to make sure they achieve minimum standards.
Keith.
Thank you. I'd just like to add, it's not only utility companies, but where developers have had a Section 50 or Section 90 on them, where they will build roads or roundabouts or whatever to support their development, especially if they're large. What you'll find is that they'll put the cheapest they can possibly put down on the road. The drop curbs will be this high instead of 0 to 6 millimetres, so they're an absolute barrier to anybody trying to get up to them. It'll be the cheapest materials you can find because the developer wants to make as much money as possible. And I think more enforcement has to be brought down, not just on utility companies, but on developers who are building the roads or the infrastructure to support their development. The quality of what they are producing must also be inspected by local authorities. If the local authority has the capacity to provide that inspection, it was about 2.5 years ago, I did a street walk with Edinburgh City Council and Napier University's Transport Research Institute, and there was roads engineers from Edinburgh telling me then, at that time, they had 4 inspectors. Now, it may have changed since then, but at that time, they had 4 inspectors for all of Edinburgh. That's ridiculous. You know, they cannot, for best will in the world, inspect all the roadworks that's going on. I say that might have changed, but that was about 2.5, 3 years ago.
You're right. Okay. Finlay, you had some questions you wanted to ask.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I'm going to jump back to other infrastructure that are not necessarily connected with car or bus travelling. We keep on hearing about how important getting out and walking and cycling is and the impact it has on health or the social impact in communities and also how important it is for older people to get out. However, a recent poll suggested that 60% of older people were concerned about uneven cracked pavements when walking, and 48% of them said they would consider not going out because of the condition of the pavements and whatever. That ties in with a 20% decrease in the amount of money spent on footway maintenance. So my question is, whilst roads, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, whilst roads are being upgraded or built, can the facilities for road users like cyclists and walkers, pedestrians or people with limited mobility, maybe with mobility scooters, should the associated infrastructure be upgraded as a matter of course?
Sounds like a question for the Keiths and Ian. So maybe if I divide them up, I'll start Keith Robertson, Ian, and then Keith Irwin.
Thank you, Convener. Short answer, absolutely. Yes, the quality of the road. When I say road, I mean from build line to build line, including pavements or shoreline to shoreline, not just the bit in the middle. Because, going back to what I said earlier, it is difficult enough to live as a disabled person. The impact it has on one's life is profound. You have to plan everything down to the greatest, tiniest detail. And if that confidence is shaken, especially if you're getting a bit older, I know I am, but I don't include myself in that, which I don't mind. But if that confidence is shaken, then people don't come out. And the impact that has on the person is devastating. And the impact it has on funding, equally so, because that has a huge impact on local health budgets. So, you know, actually getting the procurement process right, getting the quality of the roads maintenance right, and the quality of reinstatements right, has a savings effect on other parts of the budget, on health and social care. You know, and while on it, can we please remember, Convener, that I've heard a little bit talk about buses. I know it's slightly off the question, but mostly in the rural areas, if it's not a little trundle bus that has no place for a wheelchair on it, it's a coach. And mainly in the rural areas, we don't have buses. Therefore, we have to use cars. That's you know, a big problem. Just for noting, please. But yeah, we have to get the quality right.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Ian, and then what I might do is bring in Emma before I bring in Keith, because you had specific issues on cycling you wanted to raise. So, Ian.
Okay, in answer to the question, yes and no. I think yes, if there's an opportunity when general road projects are going ahead, if you can improve things for pedestrians and cyclists, yes. But in a way, your question points out the problem in that you're saying, well, it's a roads project, but roads maintenance should be about every user. So that's walkers, cyclists, buses, trucks, whatever. So in a way, the issue is really we should be taking a much more coordinated approach into how we do maintain footpaths. And I think our submission pointed out there is an issue there. Actually knowing what the situation is pretty hard because it's not really looked at. And then just backing up the thing about there is an equity thing here because older people, more vulnerable people are more likely to suffer if our footpaths aren't in good condition, as I think has been said already. But
Okay. Emma, you had some questions on cycling.
Sure, yeah. It's thank you, Convener. Good morning, everybody. I am interested in the cycling aspects, especially safe segregated cycle paths, because in your submission, it says that about 6% of crashes where someone was killed or seriously injured while cycling, there was no vehicle involved, no other collisions. So I'm assuming that's because they've hit potholes or manhole covers that weren't covered, or some issues with the roads as well. And, you know, as a former operating room nurse, I completely appreciate Alistair's analogy about the roads, and I've, you know, put bones back together as well myself. So I'd be interested to hear about the evidence about the road conditions and how do they contribute to cyclists, you know, falling foul of potholes and things like that.
I mean, I think to continue Alistair's analogy, it's easier to fix a vehicle than it is to fix a human, which is why we are so concerned about local road maintenance. The issues for people cycling, and also picking up on Finlay's question, first of all, in terms of road maintenance, often people walking or cycling don't have a way to get through. The road is closed to them when there may be opportunities to maintain a temporary route, and that's really important while the work is happening. I think in terms of the impact on people cycling more generally, it is particular problem areas where road maintenance issues can be of greater seriousness. So immediately around junctions, where as well as paying attention to vehicles, you have to pay attention clearly to the road surface ahead of you. If you have to swerve suddenly to avoid a pothole, then that creates a more hazardous situation. If you're travelling downhill with greater speed, then those surface defects, the problems they create can be magnified as well. So I think it's putting together vehicles and surface defects means that, as I've said before, local road maintenance is really important. I think it's also important to reflect that we know it's an underestimate, and we're not quite sure on the precise figures, but twice as many people are admitted to hospital having crashed off their bike than is recorded in the Police Scotland figures. So the 6% would suggest that, you know, perhaps 10 or 20 people are injured, seriously injured every year, potentially due to a surface defect. But according to the hospital figures, that the actual number is likely to be far higher, either in summer with surface defects, in winter with lack of gritting, or just general surface issues. So yes, it is clearly a priority for the safety of people cycling.
Martin, you wanted to come in on that?
Submission, a written submission, and fair enough, this is about England. We quoted a Freedom of Information request from the Federation of Small Businesses, which was covered in the Telegraph, which showed that in England in 2018-19, about 700,000 potholes, or complaints about 700,000 potholes, was an increase of 13% over the year before. and almost £2 million was paid out in compensation from 7,706 successful claims. Now, okay, that's England, but even if you just do it as economies of scale and drop the number by whatever factor you want, then you can see that it is a massive problem, and that's right across the UK. The roads are there for everybody, and we want to encourage as much active travel as we can. So I think the points that Keith make are very, very well observed.
Emma, yeah.
Has an estimate been done on what the cost of repairing these whatever number of potholes it would be to protect cyclists and other road users? But also, you know, we go on about safe segregated cycle routes in this country, but other countries manage to share roads quite easily with bicycles and cars. So is it about changing attitudes and getting people to slow down in towns and cities and things like that? So I'm interested in, you know, that kind of cost aspects of what we need to do.
In terms of cost estimates, it's not broken down in terms of cycling. What I would say is the issue with patching individual potholes is it creates a more hazardous route compared to repairing the whole of the surface carriageway. I think if, as a slight aside, it shows the importance of the transport bill parking provisions that this committee has been considering, because poor parking across footways but also across segregated cycleways will damage the surface of those. So that's why it's important that those parking provisions are enforced when they come through. The advantage of the segregated cycle routes is it means you're not swerving, you're not mixing with traffic, you're not swerving around a minor defect and colliding with a vehicle. The side of the road where people often have to cycle is often where the worst conditions of the road are, whether potholes, rutting, or quite often just gathering of debris, etc. So again, I'm sorry there's not precise figures for you, but there are strong reasons for segregation of cycling routes to keep everyone safer.
He wants to come in.
Just to slightly add to this point to Ms Harper's question, that yes, of course, we need to look at the quality of road surface to encourage active travel. But we also maybe have to look at that prioritisation, whether it's a segregated cycleway or a bus lane. If you're looking to encourage sustainable and active travel, it's about making the journey a quick journey, a safe journey, for those people, if you want to encourage that, and then you will get that increase in bus travel and increase in cycling. So it is about the standards of the roads, but it's also maybe about reallocating road space to allow prioritisation of those modes.
Emma, I think you had another line of questioning that you wanted to go off on.
Sure,
as well.
Yep. Okay.
Say,
No.
Emma, to you.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, so I'm going to move on to heavy goods vehicles and road haulage association issues, probably. When I was looking at some of the information earlier, there's the road user levy for heavy goods vehicles is intended to be used to contribute to wear and tear of the roads. And I'm interested in that, so the road users levy, just to clarify, it's collected by the DVLA and then redistributed back to Scotland through the Barnett formula. So do Scottish lorries who never go outside of Scotland pay for the road maintenance even though they're not using the roads? Right, okay.
Outside of the country.
And so lorries that maybe originate in Ireland and the north of Ireland, if they're using our roads, for instance, going to the Central Belt back and forward through the Port of Cairnryan, they don't contribute to road maintenance in the current way that...
well, it will go to the same central pot.
And
so
then get redistributed back.
Yeah.
Right, okay. All right. And it says here also that the road user levy is reduced for vehicles that emit less nitrogen oxide. So do less emitting vehicles cause less damage on the roads?
I don't think the engine is related to the damaging of the roads. I think that, I guess it's an overall picture. What I would say is that lorries, unlike a lot of other different types of vehicle, are designed so that the weight is distributed per axle. So the weight limits are designed by, as I said, how much weight can go on an axle. So, for example, a 44-ton vehicle, all the axles they'll all be they'll have air compression apart from the drive axle. So really, the only axle that, the only weight that will be put down on the road without air suspension would be about 11.5 tons. All right, so it's designed for that. Now, as I said, lorries, they do take a lot of the flak for road maintenance, and it is a fair assumption to say that the heavier the vehicle, the more damage that will be causing the roads. But we have to remember that just about everything that's moved in the UK is done on the road. So they're an absolutely integral part of how everybody exists day to day. So, I mean, depending on who you speak to, it could be 90–95% of everything you're wearing, eating, sitting on has come at some point on the back of a lorry. So in some sense, then it's inevitable, and it's a cost that's helping the economy. But as I said, what I would reiterate is that in terms of what the industry is doing to mitigate that risk, then I think there's a fair bit. The Euro 6 engines, the low emission engines, as I said, are not going to make any difference to the wear and tear on the road. It's more the wear and tear to the environment, essentially.
You in, providing you don't focus on timber, because one of the other members of the committee want to go down that route.
No, Convener, the point I wanted to make was really to build on the point that Martin Reid has made, and that's this question of engineering. And I just wanted to make the point that much of our discussion this morning has focused on urban roads. The significance of those is, I think it would be true to say that in the vast majority of cases, urban roads are engineered structures. By comparison, our rural roads cannot, by and large, be regarded as being engineered. They've been there for, in many cases, many hundreds of years, and many of them, although they may have a tarmac and stone dressing, long predate the advent of the internal combustion engine. So local authorities who are responsible for maintaining rural roads have a far greater challenge, may I say, than perhaps those dealing with engineered structures.
Does anyone want to add to that? Emma?
Specifically, what can be done or what is being done to minimise damage on the roads caused by HGVs? I mean, you're obviously doing work to address this issue, so it would be a good opportunity to see what the Road Haulage Association or other people are doing to help mitigate damage to the roads.
I guess a lot of the things that we can do is surrounding the guidance on loads, securing loads so that it's not uneven wear and tear. Also the maintenance of the trucks themselves. Everybody who operates a truck has to have an operator's licence, which means that they make a number of promises on that licence when they're granted it. And if they don't upkeep that, then they answer to a traffic commissioner who has the power to curtail and even take away their operator's licence in the first place. So the maintenance schedules are clear and they must be obeyed, including walk-around checks for the drivers that before they start their work and any time they take a break. They have to do the walk-around checks to make sure that the maintenance side of things are up to date.
You want to
I'm kind of interested in this levy. Good morning, you said good afternoon. I'm interested in this levy put on lorries and freight. Is that levy just going to a big pot, or is it reallocated to road maintenance? And if it's the latter, what's the formula for reallocating that funding if it goes to road maintenance?
I'm afraid.
Can you find out?
Yes, I will do. Yeah.
And secondly, will Brexit make any difference to charging European EU lorries using UK roads if we're no longer in the EU?
That's a very interesting question, and one that we're still waiting to get answers to, along with most of Brexit, it has to be said. We get bits and pieces of legislation, but nothing that's going to be end-to-end. The rules on cabotage will definitely change, which means that the amount of internal journeys that you can do in a second country will change. But in terms of how European trucks are accessed in the UK, we're still not 100% sure how that's going to be.
You may get the answer on the allocation of funding from the next panel. They may be in a better position to answer you. Emma, do you want to...
Oh, that's good, thanks.
Okay. Now, Colin.
I feel I've been trailed twice now in holding back the guys who want to talk about timber, so your chance is now here. I've got a couple of questions on the issue of timber transport. In your submission, the Timber Transport Forum highlighted the Timber Transport Fund, which obviously helps co-finance improvements on some non-priority roads affected by timber transport. But given the fact that councils have to match fund these improvements, which, as you say, are non-priority roads, that money has to therefore come from the overall council budget, taking it away from other council priority roads. Do you think that's a fair way to allocate funding, or should this not be entirely funded centrally with a combination of central government and the industry?
Thank you, Colin. If I could start with that one. We know that everywhere in Scotland, we know where timber accesses the local roads network, and it's about 3,000 points across Scotland. And that information and data we collect to try and help local authorities, roads, to plan for the future, to see if there are areas that they feel they can make a bid to the Timber Transport Fund to get support. The way it's set up at the moment, it's the only way, and I think roads authorities have been very fair in Scotland to work and collaborate with the timber industry to co-fund these applications. The average intervention is about 50%, so in the past 10 years, the Strategic Timber Transport Fund has spent something like £80 million. The fund itself has provided 40, and local authorities mainly have provided another 40. Some interventions can be increased to 70%, and that's obviously a bigger advantage to the local authorities. We've referred in earlier discussions to previous decades, and in the 90s there was what was known as the Roads Accord, and that was between the Forestry Commission and local authorities. And there was ring-fenced money went to the big areas of forestry, for example, Dumfries and Galloway, where 30% of our land mass is covered in forests, commercial forests. And that ring-fenced money was purely to be spent on the improvement of forestry roads. Now, that lasted through the 90s, and when it came to the millennium, that disappeared just into the general grant and disappeared like snow off a dike, quite honestly. And local members considered the possibility of weight restrictions on all forestry roads, which would have been a disaster, may I say. And it was during the dark nights of foot and mouth in Dumfries and Galloway, when I was in the council bunker as part of the response, I came up with this idea, everybody working in a partnership, a collaboration, to try and sustain the network where there wasn't money to be spent on it, and we did that through the agreed routes maps. And these agreed routes maps now are a network through the whole of the nation, the whole of Scotland, and into the north of England, so that hauliers driving these large timber wagons know exactly what the rules are. The only issue we still have in all of this, the wagon and the public are still the weakest link, but it's also the supply chain it suffers, because as David referred to earlier, the roads that timber uses are the very, very rural, remote roads that just have a skin of year after year surface dressing. They don't have any structural integrity. So to sustain these and keep them in a form that everybody can use, you can only allow 1 lorry an hour to carry its timber out and let the road recover. Or if it's stronger, 2 lorries or 3 lorries. That doesn't help the supply chain. So we're a long way from solving the supply chain of this very important industry. And again, the government, Scottish Government, very much wants to plant more trees. That's commendable when we think about the climate change emergency as well. And again, It's these remote areas that will take that additional planting, and the remote roads will have to cope with the harvesting and the thinning. So there is a long way to go on this, but please be assured there are those right across Scotland who are working very hard to try and come up with solutions.
David, I'll definitely bring you in after a pause to get to timber. We're going to get full value, I'm sure, David, from you as well.
Thank you very much. Really, just to add on to Alistair's comments and hopefully to answer some of Ms Harper's questions as well. And I'll continue Alistair's medical analogies. We continue to apply a series of sticking plasters to the problem. And that's a necessity. Ms Harper, you asked the question, what was industry doing to mitigate the problems of large goods vehicles on roads? And that's a challenge for the entire rural road network. But if I may speak about the forestry and timber sector, in addition to valuable partnerships and the development of things like the agreed routes maps that Alistair has referred to, the industry is also making good use of technology. So, for example, there are systems which I suspect most people will be unfamiliar with, but are well established in the haulage sector. Technologies called things like central tyre inflation, where you can, to some extent, reduce the tyre pressure on a vehicle dynamically according to its load, which reduces, has a rolling or smoothing or calming effect on the road. So the lorry driver can set the system whilst he's conveying his load of timber on weak sections of load to, in effect, deflate the tyres, which flattens the profile of the tyre, and reduces the point loading, the axle loading that Martin referred to. The use of CTI, as it's called, is increasingly widespread, and a number of fleets now have many, if not all of their vehicles equipped with that technology. And indeed, some areas, some buyers will require the use of those vehicles. In addition, we've seen a move away from old-fashioned types of tyres, what were called super singles, which had some benefits in some areas but don't necessarily help roads. Move away from twin axles to different tyre shapes and sizes to help the road withstand repeated traffic. And we also see the increasing use of different types, different configurations of lorries. So rather than the larger traditional articulated trailers, we're now seeing vehicles that are colloquially known as a wagon and drag, which basically is a smaller articulated arrangement, all of which target at reducing axle loading and in effect being kinder to the road.
Thank you. Colin.
Thanks, Commissioner. Just a couple of brief follow-up points. First of all, to David, the successful initiatives you refer to, such as the agreed route maps and obviously targeted funds through the Timber Transport Fund, presumably these are initiatives that could be rolled out to other sectors in areas that are affected by haulage. So it's not just about timber. Is that something that should be, you know, those areas that are facing pressures as a result, particularly rurally, as a result of lots of heavy goods vehicles? Presumably those initiatives should be rolled out elsewhere.
I would absolutely agree. Yeah. I think the Strategic Timber Transport Fund and its scheme provide a tremendous model that other sectors could look at in conjunction with the Scottish Government.
But can I just finally come back to the point, however, about the pressures on councils on having to match fund that? Can I just ask, Alistair, you mentioned that previously there was money ring-fenced to those authorities that had pressures as a result of timber, and given the fact, you rightly say that the government are driving increases in timber production, is there any part of the current allocation of funding to local councils that still takes account of those timber pressures in their overall budget, or is that completely gone?
My experience is that has completely gone.
Yeah. Okay. Peter, you had a question on this.
Yeah, and just to follow up a bit on what Mr Sulman was saying about the tyre pressure technology. I was aware of that, and I did know that lorries hauling timber had that, or some of them have that. My question is really, there are three parts. Have you any idea what percentage of the lorries that do haul timber that have this system aboard? What does it cost per lorry to fit that? And have you any measure as to what difference that actually does make in real terms on the wear and tear on these rural roads? It's kind of three additions to what you said.
Well, I'll start with an apology, Mr. Chapman. I don't, off the top of my head, happen to know the percentage of the fleet, but it is an increasing one, but I can come back to you with that data. Similarly, so the cost, there are a number of different systems, so it is not inconsiderable. The figure that many hauliers will use will typically be about £12,000 per vehicle. So it's not inexpensive, but it does provide real benefits. I'd also make the point that not only does it benefit weak rural roads, but it also actually improves the quality for the lorry driver as well. We're all aware of this issue of whole body vibration in the workplace from machinery and equipment, and all of us who regularly drive on rural roads, and indeed some urban roads where potholing, rutting and things like that are an issue, this important health-related matter of vibration is an important one. So we're helping to protect the roads, and we're helping to improve the lot of lorry drivers who suffer a great deal of other pressures as well. So, as I say, I'll come back to you, if I may, in writing with the percentage of the fleet. It's an increasing one and it's significant, but I would say more so in Scotland and parts of northern England. Once you cross the border into southern England, there's less pressure, and the use of CTI is reduced. So it is a significant feature of the timber transport fleet in Scotland. Costs, as I say, if we were to work on the figure of about £12,000, that would be realistic, and there is a real difference, a quantifiable difference.
Do you happen to know if all of Forestry Scotland haulage vehicles use that system?
Well, Forestry Scotland as such don't have a particular...
Well, but the contractors they use...
The contractors, yes.
Is it part of the contract?
It can be, yeah. It is a contract condition that is increasingly being used.
So it can be or is?
Is.
So they all are required to have that system?
I'm not sure that every project, because it will depend on the location and the quality of the roads, okay. But it is a consideration that I'm quite sure is uppermost in the minds of Forestry Scotland and Forestry and Land Scotland's award of contracts.
Okay. Emma, you had a brief follow-up, and then we're going to go to Christine.
Yeah, it is very brief. I'm just looking at the agreed routes and consultation routes in particularly in the southwest of Scotland. If we, as you mentioned, Dumfries and Galway has almost 30% of timber. So if consultation routes, which are the yellow routes, are to be proposed, how long does the consultation take, and how do you pay for the consultation? What are the costs associated? Because you're obviously managing to speak with local authorities and other members in the timber transport business. So that was just in terms of pre-budget scrutiny.
Right, if I could just explain that quickly. Agreed routes basically means that the timber industry can use these routes without question. They're mainly A-class roads. Certainly the trunk roads would come under that classification. Consultation routes and below that, that means that the industry must consult with the Roads Authority. It's not a public consultation per se, but they must consult with the Roads Authority and agree a regime to pull out the timber, thus sustaining the road. And that's done through a whole network of regional timber transport groups, who themselves at local level are collaborations and partnerships of the industry and all the agencies required.
I'm actually going to bring in the Deputy Convener, Maureen. You've got a question you'd like to ask on this?
Yes, it's a practical question here. Is there any evidence that where there are white lines painted down the side of roads, there is less breakage of the road? Because sometimes they're not visible, or there've been grasses covered them over, or less breakage on the side of the road.
Does anyone want to go on? Alistair.
Could I just impart my experience? Certainly white lining at the edge of the road does help, but that's assuming that the road is wide enough for two-way traffic. Rural roads are very narrow, and once they don't have any constraint at their edge, the grass verge acts as that constraint, and once that grass verge is damaged, then that's when you start to get the edge of the road fraying, and that's when you start to get the damage. So white lines do help, but that's assuming that the road is wide enough for two-way traffic.
As someone who lives near Durras Forest, I absolutely get that, but is there any specific training for your drivers about how to behave on rural roads?
Very much so. We're very aware that no matter how much we try as leaders and managers to organise this transport, the weakest link is the wagon and the public. And we have loads of training sessions, and we work very hard with the hauliers to make them understand that the road is there for all users, cyclists, horses, disabled. We must train, and we mentioned attitudes. Is this a problem of flinging money at it? We must also change attitudes. And everybody has to respect other road users, and we try and get that through on the drivers of these huge wagons.
I am going to go on to the next question now. Christine, it's you.
Yes, it's to do with the submission from Confederation of Passenger Transport. So, Mr White, you're my target. There are two costs.
Badge for that.
You're my gentle target. There are two, to get back to the budget and costs. In your submission, you make points about two particular costs to bus operators and coach operators. One is delays to the service because you're not informed about roadworks and so on. And the second thing is increased costs for repair and wear and tear directly attributable to the state of the roads. Now, I don't see any figures for this. And I think it's important when we're holding governments and local authorities to account of some figures. So do you have any figures for costs and fines to operators because of changes in their timetable, delays and whatnot, even cancelling services? And do you have costs for repair through wear and tear directly attributable to road surface? Or even claims that you've had to put to insurers directly again sustained because of that, so it's more cost to the operator. And if you have these, do you have them for not just Scotland but broken down by council area? Because as we know, some roads are wholly the responsibility of councils, and then we get a picture of what's costing, you know, our very precious bus companies and coach operators.
Okay, well, the short answer is, with me today, I do not have those figures. I can talk about some of the, for instance, the delays to service. As you know, the Traffic Commissioner expects 95% punctuality, and we have a window. Yeah.
No, I mean, it is money we're talking, so if we're going to lay this at the door of councils and the government, if you don't have them, you know, it's fine. Perhaps you could write to the convener with the actual figures, but it's costs I want.
Yeah, well, we can provide the costs. We have, for instance, I quoted earlier the West Coast Motors submission that reckons at a 10% increase in operating costs. But if you want an actual figure to that, what that is in money terms, I can provide that. As for the point I was raising about the Traffic Commissioner, is that if you are called to public inquiry for failing to adhere to your punctuality targets, you can reference the cause as being road maintenance issues, and so hopefully that will not result in a fine if you can prove that your failure to meet the punctuality targets was because of things out with your control. So I'm hopeful that I will not be able to ascribe a large number to that, but that doesn't mean that the process doesn't occur. One particular facet of the process with the Traffic Commissioner is that she can't call local authorities to account for instance, if a service is held up and severely delayed because of a roads maintenance issue that they've not been informed of. The local authority doesn't have to answer to the Traffic Commissioner or give evidence as to why they haven't consulted with the bus operator or informed them of that ahead of time.
That's a fair point, but that's a separate thing from costs.
Yes.
But also, are you able to give a breakdown for council areas? Is that something you would be able to get?
I would be able to speak to our operator members who operate in different council areas and ascertain costs relating to those operators, so that it would hopefully give you a rough breakdown regionally, if not by local authority area.
That's very kind, thank you.
Okay, Paul, it would be helpful if you could write to the clerks with those figures so the committee can have them when they conclude. The final question of this section rests with Maureen. Maureen.
Thank you. Keith Robertson, you mentioned having an accident at Edinburgh Airport. I wondered what the best way of is of ensuring that work sites are set up in such a way as to minimise any impact on people with mobility problems. You already kind of hinted at there not being enough road inspectors, but is there any other way, like, you know, someone else, I think it was Martin, talked about the race to the bottom in terms of the only thing that's considered in contract awarding is costs. Is there some way of making sure that contracts are awarded to somebody who consistently does a good job? And, you know, you also talked about margins being narrow because of this race to the bottom. But, you know, we've seen directors getting huge sums of money, so that doesn't wash all the time. So I just wondered if there are any other ways of making sure that roadworks and roadwork sites are better policed, either by the contractors themselves or whatever.
So, do you want to start on that? And then Martin, because you are nodding so vigorously, you'll get a chance as well.
Yes, certainly. I believe the first part of that is training. Is training. We believe that every person working on that road should receive disability awareness training and access training. Not just the ticket holder or the person who's in charge of that site, because that ticket holder may be in charge of 20 or 30 sites and may not even visit some of them, but they're still supposed to comply. That's why we welcome, hopefully it does happen, that the Red Book becomes criminalised the same as it is in, or the non-action on it rather, becomes criminalised the same as it is in England and Wales, because it then becomes a criminal offence not to follow the procedures laid down to safety at the streetworks. Getting that done is a different matter. Getting people to listen is a different matter. I'm finding that it's easier to get road authorities, especially the national ones, to listen. I'm doing a presentation on access and roadworks to Bear on Monday, and recently given presentations to ROCS, the main Rock Scotland Committee. Hoping we can do more to the regional ones. Where nobody's come forward yet is from any utility companies.
Sorry?
Where no one has come forward yet and mentioned trainings from many utility companies.
Right, okay.
And I suspect it's because they simply don't want it. But somewhere down the line, we need to get more professional. We need to become more aware. And actually, a public education process needs to be undertaken. You know, not only on what roads are, what pavements are, but how disability affects people, you know, nationwide. By nationwide, I mean across Scotland, not UK. I think that would go a long way to help. And if more people were approaching local authorities whose life wasn't affected so severely that making a complaint was a huge issue to them, you know, if it's somebody without a disability was willing to come forward because they had a little bit of an idea of what it was like not to be able to get out of your home or not be able to get down the street for your shopping, your pint of milk, your paper, whatever, that would help. Training is a big factor, absolutely. But inspections are important. I mean, they need to be increased, and something needs to be done about the costs.
Okay, Martin, I'm going to bring you in.
In terms of the procurement side of things, then there is precedent in ways to solve a lot of these problems, and that is through the adoption of project bank accounts. Project bank accounts exist where, rather than the Tier 1 contractor holding all the aces, it means that when at various pre-agreed stages, then the money goes to Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 at the same time as Tier 1. So that means that the subcontractors are getting paid at the same time and the main contractors can't use their money as cash flow and reduces them into risk.
I think that's maybe a good place to leave that. Can I thank all of you coming this morning and giving evidence to the committee? I hope you've all feel you've had a fair chance to put your views across. It's been very helpful to us, and I'm now going to suspend the meeting briefly to allow you to depart and the next panel to take their seats. So thank you very much, and I suspend the meeting. move back now onto the second panel of evidence. I'd like to welcome you all individually. Stuart Turner, the Chair, and Ewan Wallace, the Vice Chair of the Society of Chief Officers of Transport in Scotland. Councillor Stephen Heddle, the Environment and Economy Spokesperson. Robert Nicholl, Environment and Economy Chief Officer, the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. Hugh Gillies, the Director of Roads, and Donald Morrison, Head of Asset Management and Procurement Transport Scotland. There are a series of questions. I think you've all been here before, so you don't need to push the buttons on the things in front of you. If you catch my eye, as I said to the last panel, I'll endeavour to bring you in, and if you all look away at the same time, the last one will be the first one in. So on that basis, the first questions this morning to you will be from Mike Rumbles. Mike.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, panel. Audit Scotland, I mean, we are focusing on pre-budget scrutiny, so I want to see if I can get some information on the money, as it were. So Audit Scotland said in 2011 that 66% of local roads were in acceptable condition, which meant that a third weren't. In 2016, it hadn't changed in their next Audit Scotland report. And in Transport Scotland's response in January 18, they said there was a £1.2 billion needed to deal with the backlog with local roads. So my question is our job is to focus on what the Scottish Government is allocating really to local authorities for spending on local roads and road maintenance. And I'm trying to get to the figures because we don't seem to have the figures. And before we can say whether more needs to be spent or less needs to be spent, we really need to get some figures here. So what I'm trying to find out is, in the Scottish Government's budget, there's a notional allocation for road maintenance to COSLA, to local authorities. Is that figure actually being spent by COSLA members on road maintenance? Is it actually being spent, the money that you notionally receive?
So, Stephen.
I'm happy to start, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, as you noted, I think in an earlier session, yeah, we have identified that spending on local roads has fallen by 26% over a 5-year period. And as you say yourself, the funding allocated to local authorities for roads is a notional amount. In trying to determine is local government spending the money that it's allocated to on roads, it's difficult to put an exact figure on it because, as you say, it is a notional allocation. It's one of many indicators that aggregates to the funding position for local government. And in some areas, it will be more accurate than in others. But in referring to the 26% drop in spending over the last 5 years, I would note that local government's funding is reduced by 7.5% over the same period. And when we consider the effect of protected versus unprotected funding, which effectively applies a multiplier of cuts to the unprotected areas in which roads falls, you can see that the multiplying 7.5 by 2.5, which is what we estimate the multiplier effect to be, taking into account inflation, which local government is absorbing in many cases alongside the cuts, and the increase in duties on local government. I think it's the answer to the question, is local government spending all the money it gets on roads? The answer is probably, though it's difficult to be more exact than that. Referring back to the 2016 Audit Scotland report, I think that also showed that approximately half the local authorities at the time were over-investing in roads. So absolutely the willingness from local authorities to spend in roads is there if the funding is there. But the decline in the standard of roads is now, I would say, due to local government under-investing in it. It's more is due to the Scottish Government under-investing in local government to allow us to apply funding to the whole totality of services that we provide.
Our job in the committee, I mean, I'm not presuming anything, but if this committee decided in its report on pre-budget scrutiny to say that not enough Scottish Government money is allocated through COSLA to local authorities for road maintenance, we'd have to be on firm ground, if I can put it that way, because we need the figures. It would be very easy for the Scottish Government to turn around and say, well, actually, we have a nominal sum we give to local. I mean, we all know that it's up to local authority to decide how to do with the unring-fenced money. So, but it would be very easy for the Scottish Government to turn around and say, well, actually, we give them a nominal sum, and if it's not being spent on the roads, if we give them more, it still won't be spent on the roads. So what I would like from you, if you can't answer this question today, is if you could write to the committee, because I'm trying to find figures. I'm trying to actually, rather than saying probably it's spent, and we get lots of anecdotes to saying the money isn't being spent, or the money has been spent. What we need to know is the nominal amount of money that the Scottish Government allocates through COSLA to local authorities. What is it? And are local authorities spending that money? Because we need to know if there is an actual gap, or are we just talking about anecdotes? So we need the information to help on this issue.
I mean, I wonder at this stage if, Stephen, I know you want to answer, but Donald and Hugh are sat there. They presumably have the figures, or do you have the figures? Do you want to come in?
We don't have the figures of what's allocated to local government specifically for roads. We're in the same boat with Transport Scotland in that we're aware of the overall local government settlement and changes in that, but not specifically what's allocated to roads. That comes from the centre, whereas Transport Scotland obviously is responsible for the trunk roads, and we have our own figures for what's invested in the trunk road network year on year and what the profile of that is, but we don't hold the council by council figures for local roads.
Okay, Hugh, do you want to add anything, or will I go back to Steve?
My position is the same as Don's.
So, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you for letting me in again. In responding to Mr Rumble's point there, absolutely, since you've asked for that, we'll obviously try and provide that information. But we're trying to convey the wider picture of local government funding and the need. We would suggest there's three things that's at play for us here that would make be a game changer for our ability to provide services in general and maintain roads according to the specific interest of this session. And that would be for increased funding, because undeniably local government funding has decreased, for the flexibility in being able to allocate it, because the flexibility allows us to do the early intervention, to be innovative, to prioritise and do this on a kind of multi-annual basis, so we can prioritise roads when roads is an issue, we can prioritise planning when planning is an issue. So there's three aspects to this. There's the funding, there's the flexibility, and there's the multi-annual approach to things. What we're very guarded about is the idea that roads would just become another ring fence thing in the local government settlement, because this is just transferring in successive rounds of ring fencing pressure more onto the unprotected areas, and roads is experiencing pressure which is an unprotected area. But if we sort out roads in that way, it transfers it to planning, it transfers it to community assets, it transfers it to local economic development. And I noticed that your first question was, how have recent spending decisions on roads maintenance affected the quality of Scotland's roads, road users, businesses, public services and the economy? Well, public services and the economy, it's not just in the roads strand, it's in all the other things that's competing for funding with roads. So we need the flexibility to be able to address these things.
Yeah.
I tell you why I'm puzzled, because we're getting figures from all over the place, and it doesn't seem to resonate correctly. I mean, long ago as 2004, Audit Scotland said on our local roads, and it's just local authority roads, there was a £1.7 billion local, there was a backlog of spending of £1.7 billion to put it to its proper acceptable level. If we do a more recent report, it says Audit Scotland produced reports in 2011 and 2016 where it said only 2/3 of our roads are at acceptable level, but they also said that with declining road maintenance targets, it was stable, hadn't changed in that period. But in Transport Scotland's response to Audit Scotland's report published in January 18, Transport Scotland with other organisations, it talks about a figure of £1.2 billion needed to deal with the backlog. So we've got 1.7 there and 1.2 here. I don't know, reading all of this, what the actual situation is. And if we are going to produce a report which has some depth to it and some influence on the Scottish Government, we've really got to get to grips with these figures. So can Transport Scotland tell me what are the difference?
Sorry, can I bring in Stuart or you? And I mean, you haven't contributed. Stuart, do you want to go with that?
Thank you, Chair. Mr Rumbles, the current figure for the backlogs on Scottish roads is £1.8 billion. But I think the problem with that is year on year we evaluate what the backlog is, and year on year we compare these figures. I think what we need to recognise is a large number, and funding over the last 5 or 6 years has got less on the roads. The techniques we've used over the last 5 to 6 years are make it easier for us to manage the road network. We've got a fantastic roads asset management system. We know Transport Scotland use something similar. We've also used different techniques to surface the roads. So we're really papering over cracks on our road network at the moment. So whatever the backlog figure is, it is huge. In every single council area, all 32 councils plus Transport Scotland, it's very, very large. And we just try to get to a place where we've got more money to spend overall on the roads maintenance.
Try to get the actual figures, so that'd be helpful.
Okay. Yeah, maybe what the confusion is, the backlog for local roads and the backlog for trunk roads is calculated separately, so it's two different numbers, and I think that's maybe the two numbers you've got there.
1.8 for local roads.
1.2. At the time of the report, it was 1.2 for trunk roads.
Okay. Richard, you wanted to come in?
Yes. Councillor Stephen Headley, I actually was the SNP group leader in COSLA 2007-9, and in the Concord that day's ring fencing was removed substantially from quite a number. Are you suggesting that we go back to ring fencing for roads issue? And it's quite, you know, COSLA, it's quite easy, you can contact 32 councils and say, how much do you get? In fact, you guys should have the figures. How much do you get in your budget? How much do you get for roads? Can you give us those figures, please, and we'll send it up to the Scottish Parliament. Thank you very much. It's quite easy for COSLA to get that information. Maybe hard for us, maybe hard for Transport Scotland, but not for COSLA.
Yes, thank you. It's I've already undertaken that we'll try and provide the figures, but it has to be borne in mind that this is a kind of a proxy figure. It's not based on need. Returning to your first point around ring fencing, absolutely not advocating ring fencing. I would advocate the return to the status or the Concordat, which I thought represented a very good state of affairs between local and national government. And I think this is something that we're trying to return to in the joint work on the national performance framework. I mean, we have sort of shared goals in respect to achieving these outcomes for the country. So if it's on a basis of allowing local government to do things in its own way, but to meet the national targets, I think that affords us the kind of flexibility that would benefit us.
Can I ask a question? I mean, it seems that the figures that what we're saying is that we've got £3 billion of roadworks that need to be undertaken, if you add the two figures together across all the network. And the government allocate money to a council in a grant, of which an amount of money within that will be seen as going towards road repairs. What people won't understand, or what I'm struggling to understand, is whether that money is actually going to road repairs or whether it's actually going off onto other projects. And what this committee is going to have to do is go back to the government and say, when we decide how much money is outstanding, how much money is needed, and what the shortfall is, if there is a shortfall, or whether they're oversubscribing and all the roads should be perfect. And I'm not sure I'm hearing that from everyone this morning to clarify it. So perhaps you could help me. Perhaps I'm not understanding. You know, is there money set aside for road repairs, and is it all being spent by all the council on road repairs? Stephen, do you want to just help me on that? Sorry, I won't speak here, sir. Yeah, the situation is that
the councils all across the country will be starting their budget setting process now, and they will have a set amount of money, which they don't know yet, because we'll be told this sometime in December, that we can spend on all our unprotected services. And in that, roads will be competing alongside economic development, planning, community services, elements of housing, a whole range of things that the local people will be unquestionably placing demands on the council for. Grass cutting, grounds maintenance, all these kind of things. And the councils will look at the totality of the money and they will carve it up according to the local priorities. And this is the kind of, I would say, entirely appropriate. This is local democracy in action. The amount of money that's actually spent on roads is based on affordability and local priority. In responding to Mr Rumbles, I've tried to give an indicative figure that suggests that yes, we probably are spending the money that we get on roads already, because the decline in funding on roads basically mirrors the decline on funding that's come to local government.
Okay. John, you want to come in, and then I'm going to come to you, Angus.
Thank you, Convener. Councillor Heddle, I wanted to maybe draw an analogy with one, and forgive me because I forget the name, but it's, and in fact it's just changed the name, the Scottish Government School Building Programme, where they provide assistance on top of the capital allocation to local authorities to build. And I understand that, and they're not from the area I represent, but some local authorities are quite aggrieved about that process because they've already brought their schools up to a standard, so they're not going to benefit from this new scheme. Is there a danger, and I absolutely go with you that about local decision making, is there not a danger that if this committee, for instance, were to come up with a formula or a suggestion as to regards road funding, that we're going to reward failure? We're going to reward the people who haven't maintained the roads rather than have, because I jealously guard local autonomy and decision making. But, you know, all these organisations you could have mentioned, all these departments within local authorities, other committees could be hearing exactly the same thing from them. So how do we square that, please?
That's a very good point. I mean, the other committees will be hearing exactly the same thing in respect to other issues, and yeah, it'll obviously vary by local area. The way to answer that is a general increase in local authority funding, so that people can fill in the gaps in their respective areas as they've accumulated, whether it's in spending on roads maintenance, economic development, all these things. I mean, you identify a kind of very real risk that could be reward and failure, but this is what happens when you have targeted initiatives and ring fencing.
Yeah, well, for the avoidance of doubt, I wasn't commending ring fencing, but I'm not seeing how in itself an increase addresses the issue. I mean, Mr Rumbles is quite rightly trying to identify, home in on the scale of the issue and how we address that. Because, you know, councils could receive a significant increase but still make a locally democratic decision to say, well, we're actually going to direct these additional monies to housing.
But they would have to answer to their electorate, who would be undeniably upset if they had terrible roads that weren't being repaired. You would hope that the kind of aspirations across the country would be reasonably uniform in terms of having a decent road standard, so that the system would be effectively self-correcting.
Angus, you wanted to push on an aspect of that.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just briefly, because we've entered into an interesting debate on ring fencing, and I take on board Councillor Heddle's view on the matter. However, in the previous panel, we heard a call from, I think it was Paul White, for ring fencing. Now, we saw a great deal of ring fencing done away with in 2007 amongst a fanfare. If I recall rightly, it was a historic concordat that was referred to at the time. Now, if we're to catch up on the £1.8 billion backlog on local roads, then surely there has to be ring fencing to address the matter.
Stuart, do you want to come in, or Ewan? I'd like to.
And first, Chair, I think one thing to recognise as well, in addition to the backlog, There's also the standstill budget, which we require to maintain the roads in the condition they are at the moment. And generally, that is round about the right value of money. So a normal authority with the size of the two I've got is £5 million per year. So we get that amount of budget. One thing to also recognise, Mr MacDonald, is that roads maintenance, the budgets Mr Rumbles is talking about, is for all roads maintenance, whereas the numbers we are talking about is the condition of the carriageway. It's not talking about the pavements or the safety fencing or the street lights, the verges or the signs. And what we see from an asset management point of view, the condition of that part of the network is getting worse and worse. So on one hand, although we're addressing today the very important issue of smooth running surfaces, good running surfaces without potholes, ourselves in local government just want to make sure the pavements and all the rest of the infrastructure we have is in good condition as well. So we shouldn't lose focus on that.
Ewan, do you want to comment on that? Or?
Yes, Convener, and thank you for bringing me in. In terms of the experiences, I think, across the 32 local authorities, absolutely, we will be able to give that information in the via cause law in terms of how much has been spent, because that's a matter of public record, usually around about June every year, in terms of how much was spent in the previous year. And Stuart's correct in terms of saying that it's a full range of activities that we would be allocating funds against. In terms of at the moment, I think there's one area probably that's still ring-fenced in terms of cycling, walking, safer streets, in terms of within transport-related budgets. And certainly within the Roads Authority side, we would echo the cause of position in terms of allowing that local decision-making is absolutely critical, but it is becoming increasingly difficult when it's swung to such a large proportion of the allocation of funds is already prescribed. So that does make it then very difficult to set those budgets. All 32 authorities will be doing work just now, putting the information in front of the elected members about the amounts that should be allocated for road maintenance in the coming financial year. And it's essentially, we've agreed across all 32 local authorities that through the road asset management planning process that we undertake what we call a status and options report for the road network. And that looks at what's been spent in the past, what the condition of the network is, and what we consider as professionals the amounts of money that should be spent going forward to address the backlog, to keep a steady state situation, or to actually improve the condition. So that you will start to see within councils that information being presented to the local politicians over the coming months as part of their own consideration before the budget setting in February.
Robert.
Yes, just maybe to make one point, because I think we've talked about ring fencing, but I think I would refer the committee to the evidence that we've provided, and I think we've provided to this committee as well in pre-budget scrutiny for the whole of the local government budget. And certainly in that, we were drawing a slight distinction between pots of money that are ring-fenced, and COSLA does not support ring-fencing, but protection of budgets more generally, so within education and health and social care, the big budget spend within local government. And it's about the impact of big, large budgets like that being protected and being difficult to modify, that has on other unprotected services, of which roads is one. So I think there's a slight distinction there. There is a distinction between ring fencing, which might be a grant, but then the impact of protection of big services and the impact that has on and I would draw the committee's attention to our evidence, which goes into that in a little bit more detail.
I think we'll move on to the next question. Richard, you had some questions you want to ask.
Yeah, I've actually just pulled up something very interesting on my phone. Councils last year got an extra 186.54 million. Orkney Council got an extra 1.02 million. And basically, the additional money, and there's going to be moves to go into a 3-year budget. So that shows that actually my own council got over £11 million extra in North Lanarkshire, which was quite pleasing. So the point I'm making is we can easily get figures. There I've got figures off my phone, so I'm sure COSLA can get figures in regards to roads. Now I'll ask the question I'm supposed to ask. Scots, the Society of Chief Officers of Transport Scotland, highlighted written evidence that the Roads Collaboration Programme has successfully delivered a range of collaborative activities. Can you outline these successes, indicate how they could be replicated and explain what impact they could have on road conditions?
I'm going to go to Stuart and Ewan, but I'm going to give you, Stephen, a chance to answer the fact that there was all this extra money and it was all fine. So, because that was posed as part of the question. So, Stuart.
Thank you very much, Chair. I mean, the response to that would be, we wish. We would point out that local government budgets have decreased significantly over a number of years, and that in 1920 the core revenue budget fell by £147 million, while the core capital budgets fell by £17 million. The figures you quote are modified by the additional responsibilities placed upon local government and the ring-fenced funds that's used to fund them. Now, a lot of these additional responsibilities we find are cast as being fully funded, but the way that they seem to be being fully funded is by taking money for the core local government budget, which is compounding the very issues that we're discussing today.
Right. Now, Stuart and Ewan.
Convener, I'll start. Mr Lyle, thank you for that question. An opportunity to speak about the Roads Collaboration Programme, which has been running for a number of years and provides a great deal of benefits. Hopefully it's seen by the people out there in the street using our roads. Probably one of the biggest collaboration pieces of work we do in Scots is the Scottish Road Maintenance Condition Survey, where all 32 authorities contribute and we measure the condition of our roads, and that's really why we're here today. We measure the red and the amber and the green, and around about 37% of our road network is in the red and amber and requires repair. But we also work out the value of the backlog, and we also work out the standstill budget. And that's something which Ewan touched on as well in his status and option report. It's taken to every council throughout the year, at different times throughout the year, devise councils of where we are. So that's one thing that we work collectively with. We also collectively have a Roads Asset Management Plan working group, where all 32 councils contribute to get the best possible review of the current assets we have within Scotland. And that's just not the road itself, as I touched on earlier. It's the pavements, the street lighting, and all the other parts of the infrastructure that we have. One thing that we're moving forward on just now is road worker training, and in the previous session to us there was some discussion on the quality of reinstatements. Well, we're going to address that in Scots with our training programme going to commence on the 1st of April next year, where all 32 authorities will be collectively managed to make sure that the training that is undertaken with these road workers is consistent. So it doesn't matter if you're in Orkney, with myself in Ayrshire, Ewan in Aberdeenshire, these road workers will be trained to the same standard, and if you train everybody to the same standard, we expect the quality of the road works to improve. We also, through the Roads Collaboration Programme, we have a number of collaboration pieces of management throughout the country. I am actually head of roads, the Ayrshire Roads Alliance. It's my day job, so we may touch about how we govern, but that has moved forward over the last 5 or 6 years where I am. There's a Northern Collaboration Board, which Ewan is in charge of, or the lead officer for, which is the authorities running round from Argyll and Bute, round the north of Scotland, round through to Aberdeenshire and Aberdeen City. So that is moving forward well. They have a joint committee. And we know there's work ongoing with other collaboration programmes throughout Scotland, but we shouldn't forget about Tayside Contracts, who are really the DLO arm of Tayside area, so it's Angus, Perth and Ross and Dundee. But the most recent collaboration, formal collaboration, is between Inverclyde and West Dunbartonshire Council, where they have now moved to a joint committee as well. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot of improvements been undertaken, and hopefully we'll see the benefits of that as we move forward.
When I was a councillor, I was never a supporter of regional councils, but I'm a supporter of likes of Tayside Contracts, Amy in North Lanarkshire, and there may be a case that some councils can work collaboratively with each other, you know, and to spread over the area. But the other question before I finish is, when I come off a bypass, I go up the slip road. So I'm coming off a road that's done by Transport Scotland. I then come up onto the roundabout at the top of the road. I'm now in the council domain. Do you think that councils and Transport Scotland work enough with each other in order to maintain our roads?
the answer to that question is yes, we do work well together. We have lots of meetings throughout the year, now whether that's directly with ourselves, you and Transport Scotland colleagues, but we also at a local authority level meet with the trunk road operators, because it shouldn't really matter to the public if they're on a trunk road or a local road. They should expect a level of service that is satisfactory. So I think the work relationship we've got with Transport Scotland, it cannot be improved. It's very, very good.
Thank you.
Just before I bring you in, Maureen, you had a question. Maybe pick up Christine's as well.
It's specifically to you. And can you tell us a bit more about how this collaboration in the North works and what it actually delivers? I mean, does it mean that you're not competing for jobs at the same time? There's more of a pipeline of work? Or how is it actually benefiting, A, the taxpayer, and B, the provision of good roads?
Okay. Thank you, Convener.
And bridges.
Absolutely. Firstly, I know that Stuart said I was in charge of that group. I absolutely am not in charge of that group. It has a political chair, and I'm the lead officer on behalf of the officer representation for that Northern collaboration. So what that is, it's a formal joint committee, 7 local authorities across the North. So Angus Council, Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire, Moray, Highland, the Western Isles and Argyll and Bute. The chair of the committee is currently from Argyll and Bute, and a very good chair she is as well, so it's been very positive. So what we've sought to do there is deal with the governance issues about being able to work across boundaries. So we've already had a situation where one authority is aiding another, or has aided another by doing work that they didn't have the skills base to do, and they would have had to go to the private sector. The product's been better and it was cheaper to local government. So there was a saving to one authority and an income to another. So we've established that principle of that. At the most recent meeting, the political representatives agreed that we move to a broader business case to do a whole range of professional services. So design schemes, it could be the design of additional bridges to upgrade or replace ones that have recently gone, all those different elements, geotechnical engineering, those experts. So they've agreed a business case in terms of that. We've already got a situation where the Moray Council have a dredger that is utilised through a framework by other members of the joint committee. We've produced briefings for the members on key issues, including the alternative use of materials in road construction. The thing we haven't done is we haven't got to the point where we're saying we're going to then pool any budgets, because that's not where we're going to go. That's not the main reason for that joint committee. It's about resilience and building that in. In terms of the value then to the taxpayer, it's the ability to do that work across boundaries as efficiently as we can. If Highland Council have a resource available to do design work and Aberdeen City Council require that to be undertaken, then we've now got a formal governance framework that we can allow that to happen between authorities. I think that was probably the main points in terms of that Northern collaboration. So it's quite different from Ayrshire Roads Alliance, it's quite different from Tayside contracts, and the scale of it would mean, would we be able to share plant across boundaries? Potentially, but only when the geography would allow that. But we can certainly share skills, knowledge and experience across all those boundaries. So.
Christine, did you want to come in?
Very short. Mr Turner, you mentioned 37% of roads are in red or amber. Is that overall, what's the split between trunk and council roads?
I don't know the split between trunk and council roads, but we've got a split for every single council, local authority area, and the different types of road that we have, A, B, C, and unclassified roads.
And does that, have we been given that?
Well, if you don't have it, it's something we can provide.
Thank you.
Donald, you want to come in? And I'm going to bring in Hugh, because your title, Hugh, is Director of Roads. So that to me sounds like all roads, but I'd like clarification of whether that's just trunk roads or whether you get involved in local roads as well. Donald first.
Just to come back on that last question about the percentages of red and amber, the 37% that you mentioned there is for all council roads, which obviously varies from council to council what their contribution to that is. There's a separate figure for trunk roads, which is 13%.
Okay, that's good.
That was published in the Audit Scotland report, so it was 13% for trunk roads.
You do you want to come in and just explain that, and you can maybe at the same time explain how you're going to do the 1.2 deficit on trunk roads that was talked about.
So to explain my role, so Director for Roads, so I actually do have a policy interest in local roads, but as well as my direct responsibility for getting on for 3,500 kilometres of trunk road. Donald's my finance and numbers man, so I'm glad he's with me today, but he helps me on in terms of finance. So what Stuart described to you in terms of how we're going to tackle the backlog and in our budgets, we also present to Scottish Ministers through spending reviews, in effect, a scenario of a standstill budget, if you will, and then a budget which would allow us to then eat into the 1.2. So that's a very similar description to what Stuart has offered to you. But I do have responsibilities in a policy sense elsewhere within local roads, primarily through two areas. I'm leading on low emission zones, which are in the 4 cities. So that's proving an interesting challenge. But that means working with the four cities of Aberdeen, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Now, it's their surface streets, it's their inner council areas, but from a policy delivery point of view, I'm working with them. The other area of significance where I have responsibility is on road safety. And we tend to, with those who within the profession, tend to split road safety into what they call the 4 E's: education, engineering, encouragement and enforcement. So I have responsibility directly for the road safety on the trunk road network, but also in the policy area within education and encouragement.
I think then we'll move on. Richard, Peter, you had some questions there, I think.
Yep. There's an organisation called the Scottish Road Network Management Forum. I just wonder what it is, how it's made up, and what practical difference it is making to the management of Scotland's roads.
Donald.
The Network Management Forum is a subgroup of the Road Collaboration Board. It's Transport Scotland and Scots that jointly sit on the Network Management Forum, and it comes back to the earlier question from Mr Lyle about how Scots and Transport Scotland collaborate and coordinate. It's through that forum essentially. So the work of that group is looking at where there's an interface between maintenance of trunk roads and maintenance of local roads, and what we can do to share knowledge and share services across those boundaries. So, for example, at the moment we're looking at our new trunk road maintenance contracts and where improvements can be made there to provide collaboration with local authorities. So we're looking at the potential for shared depots, for example, between the trunk road service and the local road service, because there's potential for efficiencies there. So there's a project on the go at the moment which is looking at the potential for shared depots. And we're also looking at, based on the feedback we get through that forum, we can then feed that back into our trunk road maintenance contracts as we're drafting them, and set out requirements in terms of collaboration and shared services. So it's a specific subgroup between Transport Scotland and Scots.
Come in, and then I'll come back to you, Peter.
Just quickly, Convener, just for completeness, Hugh, Donald and their team are fully embedded in terms of the collaborative work that we've undertaken across the north and across all the discussions. So Donald himself has certainly addressed the joint committee on a couple of occasions and has produced papers. So it's just so that gives that complete picture for the whole of the networks.
Peter.
Yeah, well, that's good, and the feeling is that as an organisation, it's working well. It's beginning to deliver real savings and collaboration. It's working out there.
Yes, I think there's plenty of activity on the collaboration front. Right. I would say it has been successful.
So, in another tack, the Scots highlight in written evidence that we received the ongoing development of a new infrastructure evaluation model or framework. And can you explain how this will improve on current arrangements and what practical difference it's likely to make? There seems to be lots of various bodies out there, but I'm trying to find out how they all interact and how they work together and what they can actually deliver.
Stuart, you're going to go on.
Convener, thank you. Mr Chapman, this is a piece of work we're undertaking through the Scottish Road Research Board, which I'm a member, as is Donald. We're trying to value the value of the road network, what the value of it is. I don't mean necessarily in monetary terms, although that there will be a number at the end, because we know that every journey that is made by road. It might be made by rail, but it's generally made by road, rail or active travel, and just trying to understand what impact that road journey has on the economy. We haven't finished that piece of work yet, and once that is completed, that is something we can present to committee, if you wish. But we're just trying to establish through this piece of work to see whether we can get some sort of value to the value of the local road network and the trunk road network.
Chair, just picking up the point there from Mr Chapman, you said you think there's an array of organisations. I think one of the things we've been working on in the RCP Roads Collaboration Programme, it was set up a few years back, and we've collectively, the constituent parts of that, Transport Scotland, Coslas, Scots, Solace, the Improvement Service, realise it's time for a reboot, so that we actually are, the very point you're making, it's a place where officers within these various organisations can come together and share common cause and give a common message, and also with a place where, as officers, because we have our political masters, we can debate the issues of the day and reach a common view, or disagree. But there's a place, that's the one place where officers across these range of organisations will come together and look to see what the future of Scotland's roads within the overall transport portfolio looks like going forward.
Thank you. Finlay, you had some questions you wanted to ask.
Thank you, Convener. My question's around the road asset management plans, particularly in relation to trunk roads. We have some issues. I'm going to be a bit parochial here. Mr Guinness will be aware that we've got an ongoing issue with...
If it's a constituency issue, I will...
Well, you can challenge me, but I suppose and I will stop, Convener.
Mr Finlay, be careful. It is something that we have on this committee that we don't like to go into constituency issues. We want to look at a national picture. So
no, it's absolutely a national picture, but I'll put it into perspective by giving you an example exactly. It will be helpful. As Mr Gillis knows, there's been a petition running regarding the maintenance of the A77 and A75, and we've got something like 4,500 signatures to say they're not happy with the way it's been maintained, not just the road surface, but also the wider asset, if you like, so the verges and the roads side vegetation. With regards to the ramps, how does that play into the relationship between Transport Scotland and the delivery company, so whether that's AME or whether it's Transurf Scotland? Is it you that looks at the whole asset management approach and that's applied to the contract you have with these companies, or what way around does it work?
I'll take that one, Mr Carson. Yes, the Road Asset Management Plan effectively sets out the strategic approach and gives an overall view of how we plan our maintenance, the life cycle plans that we have, and what our approach is going forward. The detail is included in the trunk road maintenance contracts themselves, so the specific requirements in terms of maintenance that the operators have to undertake, and that starts with inspection. That's obviously a key part of it, and identifying the defects. And from that, excuse me, they implement programmes of work based on the defects that they identify. So the detail of the requirements is in the contracts, but the Road Asset Management Plan is the overall strategic approach, is how it's set out.
Okay, because there's an argument that what we sometimes see is the roads go beyond, they're repaired on a reactionary basis rather than any long-term plans, and we've certainly seen again an example in the South West where it appears to have been an acceleration of projects before the end of a contract with the likes of Transurf. Does the ramps not suggest that shouldn't be the case?
Well, we have the life cycle plan set out a long-term approach, so it is a continuous approach on an annual basis. It's a mix of reactive work, which deals with defects that occur on a day-to-day basis, the most obvious one being potholes, for example. These are the reactive treatments. But on an annual basis, we also have a programme of planned work, which is prioritised based on need. And that planned work is what you might want to call preventative maintenance. So that's the kind of longer stretches of resurfacing or reconstruction. And that there's an annual programme of that going forward.
Okay, thanks. Christine.
Yes, thank you. I'm a bit like Mr Chapman. There's all these various organisations that deal with a collaboration, sharing and so on. Talking about sharing maybe assets in terms of repair lorries and so on. What I wanted to ask you, and I'm going to give an example following my colleague here's route, is that I have in my part a road where there's a bad bit called the Ledburn Junction. It's actually in the provenance of Midlothian Council, but most people who use it are Borders people. So the repair lands on one council and they fight about it. What I wanted to ask Councillor Heddle is, from COSLA is, is there a way that councils at certain, with agreement, but we could have councils actually coming together to fund roads where it's obvious that there is a shared concern about it, because when you're driving one road, you don't know you're suddenly going into another council's area, and it can just be a few inches. I'm old money, I'm not into meters yet. A few inches over, and you're in another council, and the road's maintained in a different way, but it's the same road. So, I appreciate it's difficult, and I appreciate the autonomy of councils, but is there a way that COSA is working on or could work on sharing resources at certain routes where it really would be relevant to both of their constituency areas, their wards?
Well, the final decision...
Well, it wouldn't affect Orkney so much. No, I appreciate that.
That's it. We are a unique situation where I think we have
I've got a sister who's an
roads.
Arcadian, so I know that.
We would find it difficult to find road junctions shared with Highland. But obviously the final decision for such things rests with councillors, but certainly we're trying to foster collaboration. We have our Scots colleagues be able to identify excellent examples in terms of the northern collaboration, the Ayrshire example, and this sort of plays into the kind of the wider agenda that we have for regional collaboration around economic partnerships. We feel that the examples that have developed so far have been largely in accord with what the Audit Scotland were recommending in the 2016 report, and there's good progress towards that. But I mean, certainly the issue you discuss, absolutely we would be happy to encourage councils to collaborate in such a way.
How is it going? I mean, the money being's the big issue, isn't it? So how is that? Is that making progress? Because I think really the public would expect that to happen.
I'll have to defer to colleagues for specifics.
I mean, do you want, examples of good collaboration?
I could give you some examples in my area where I'm at the moment. One's an historic, one's a current practice we do.
Okay.
We've just finished a scheme in the east part of East Ayrshire, which butts into South Lanarkshire Council. There was sharing of costs, because there was some benefit to South Lanarkshire Council as well. And that was 7 or 8 years ago that was agreed. That job is finished, and the agreement was met. What I've got now, where I am in Ayrshire, I am head of roads for East Ayrshire Council and South Ayrshire Council. And because of that, we can actually look across boundary. So we've actually done several schemes which have gone from East Ayrshire into South Ayrshire, and the sharing of costs. So if the surfacing was undertaken in South Ayrshire, it's paid by South Ayrshire, and the works in East Ayrshire were undertaken, they were paid by East Ayrshire. That's because we didn't want to get to a boundary and actually just finish a piece of road and leave the bit. Yeah. So that was true collaboration, the benefit we have the alliance in Ayrshire.
I'm briefly bring in Emma as a supplementary, and then I'm going to move to Colin.
Okay, thank you. It is a national issue. I'm just wondering, since we're talking about collaboration and in terms of pre-budget, the Infrastructure Commission for Scotland was formed recently, and it's an independent body to look at the 30-year strategy for the future. So is there work being done to look at how we develop the infrastructure that we need for the future?
I'd like to head off on that. Donald.
Well, I can partly answer that, certainly in terms of the trunk road approach and trunk road maintenance. It comes back to what Hugh was saying a short while ago about long-term financial plans. So to feed into the Infrastructure Commission work, what we have in Transport Scotland is we've developed a long-term financial plan for trunk road maintenance using the financial models that we have. So that looks at where we are just now in terms of road condition and provides options going forward over 5, 10, 15 year or whatever horizon we want to look at in terms of the financial model. We can set targets in terms of road condition within that model, and that will then produce a financial plan which gives ministers options in terms of whether or not they want to make those choices to fund that.
Come in briefly, or Stuart, one, not both.
Well, my red light's going on first, so I suspect it'll be me then. So thank you. Yeah, in terms of the input to the work of the Infrastructure Commission, I can certainly give an example that in the North East, we took all of the work that we've been doing around collaboration on transport and road maintenance and all of that information, and that was part of the submission. My understanding is a lot of colleagues around Scotland will have been doing the same pieces of work, that will have worked closely with the Regional Transport Partnership colleagues, the Economic Development Partners, and to put in that overall holistic picture about the role of infrastructure, how we maintain it, how we develop it, to get that inclusive growth and that low carbon future, which the Commission is very much focused on. And certainly they've run a number of sessions in terms of roundtable discussions, and I can't talk for the rest of Scots, but I know that I know a number of colleagues that have been heavily involved in those discussions, and I think it's been appreciated by the Commission that we've taken that evidence that we've utilised about road maintenance and the role of the road network into those discussions.
Okay, thank you. The next questions are from Colin.
Thank you very much, Convener. The committee has obviously heard calls for the Scottish Government to focus on the maintenance of the existing road network before investing in the expansion of the trunk road network, and obviously that's hinted at quite strongly in the consultation over the National Transport Strategy. Can I ask the panel what your views are on this suggestion, how the government balance the network development with the need for ongoing maintenance?
Hugh, do you want to go with that?
Well, my position will be, as you've said, Mr. Smith, in the NTS, that I think the position would be we would invest in what we've got, maintain what we've got, add to what we've got, and then build new. I think that's been the position we've tried to do historically. Obviously, the NTS is out for consultation just now. Views will be heard, and then that will respond on that basis.
The balance will change, that there will be more focus on maintenance than the expansion of the network. Is that a fair reflection of the direction of travel we're in at the moment?
Well, that's out for consultation just now, but that's a clear indication of an option to go forward.
Stephen, do you want to give a view on that?
Just to say that I don't have the answer to that question. It's a very good question. I mean, obviously expansion of infrastructure is completely tied to economic development. We find this time and time again that and certainly the Development South of Scotland Enterprise Agency, they've identified infrastructure as one of their key objectives, both in terms of transport infrastructure and digital connectivity. So obviously the existing infrastructure and the upgrading of that is key to their objectives as well. So trying to prioritise between new infrastructure when we don't know what it is and existing infrastructure where we don't know where it's being focused, it's a difficult distinction to make. It's a very good question. It's one that we need to wrestle with.
Stuart, very briefly.
Certainly, Convener. Just want to confirm that the view of Scots when it comes to draft National Transport Strategy, we agree in principle. The way forward, as Hugh described there, I think we have to recognise it's about a sustainable travel hierarchy, so we have to get walking, cycling, public transport ahead of the car. I think we all agree that is the way forward to make a healthier and better Scotland. But we still have to maintain what we've got. So if we can maintain what we've got in a better condition, then I'm sure we can move forward. And the analogy it's used sometimes is, in a house, you'd fix the roof before you put in new carpets.
Okay. Very briefly, Colin.
just to do what everybody else is doing at the moment, is using the local example in your area, Mr Turner, there's bound to be an element of resentment if having seen the government spend literally billions and proposing to spend billions upgrading the A9, if we suddenly move to a position whereby we're not expanding roads anymore, people who live or travel on the A75, the A77, to the ferry ports through Ayrshire are going to feel particularly angry because they haven't benefited from that investment if we suddenly move away from supporting expanding the network to a policy of just maintaining what we've got.
I think we need to be really careful about setting one part of Scotland off against the other. I think we need to look at the national... Stuart, if you want to answer that very, very briefly.
All I would respond to Mr Smith, and that is that the National Transport Strategy will develop into the Strategic Transport Projects Review, and that gives us as local authorities opportunity to contribute to that.
I think the argument about over which project should be done over another is a matter for speaking to the Minister. So I'm going to move straight on to Emma with your question.
Thanks, Convener. If we're talking about like active travel, walking and cycling and promoting people walking and cycling, it's been suggested that while roads are undergoing maintenance, that facilities for specific road users like people in wheelchairs or the pedestrians and the cyclists with limited mobility or people with limited mobility, that those roads should really be fixed and upgraded as a matter of course. So what would the panel's views be on that suggestion?
Donald.
One thing that we're looking to take forward, and we've started to spend money on the trunk roads, is addressing barriers to accessibility, barriers to movement. It's a programme that came out of our Roads for All Forum. We have a Roads for All Forum chaired by Transport Scotland, attended by Scots, local authorities, Max, Cycling Scotland, etc. There's a number of stakeholders on that group. And one thing which we did in the early stages of that group was we did an audit effectively of the whole trunk road network and identified the barriers to accessibility. There were several thousand identified in actual fact across the 3,500 kilometres. Last year we invested £2 million in addressing those barriers to accessibility. So it's the likes of where there should be drop curbs, looking at pedestrian facilities, cycle facilities, etc. And this year we've invested another £2 million addressing those barriers to accessibility. So that's a programme which we've recently implemented. There's a lot of work to be done on it, but in the years going forward, hopefully with budgets, we'll be able to continue that programme and address all the defects that we identified.
Stuart or Ewan, do you want to come on that?
I think the issues raised by Donald, we echo those. It's really important. It's not... roads are not just for people who drive a car or drive a lorry, it's for every day. And as I touched on earlier, it's all about active travel. We have to make sure our pavements and our roads and our footpaths are as safe as we possibly can be. And I know collectively 32 authorities do take, through one of our working groups, take an active role in making it as safe as possible for these road users.
And I assume, Stephen, that you would echo those comments and I can... move on, or...?
Well, I would probably defer to my colleague, Robert, to articulate the position.
Nothing much more to add. I would agree with colleagues instantly. I think, obviously, COSLA is a big supporter of things like the draft National Transport Strategy, but also the Accessible Transport Strategy as well. So I think much of this has to be, for COSLA point of view, left at the local level, because it comes down to very local decisions about junctions, etc., etc. So, but I mean, I would agree utterly with the comments by colleagues.
Now, Angus, yours is the next question. So, if you'd like to also ask pointed at a particular person, that would be helpful.
Okay, thanks. The panel may have heard me ask this question to the previous panel. However, it's just as salient to this one. Several witnesses have identified the root cause of many road maintenance problems as being road authority and utility company procurement focused on minimising the cost of work undertaken rather than maximising the quality of the work. So would you agree that that's an issue and how should it be addressed? Perhaps Councillor Heddle first.
I would probably defer to Scott's colleagues on this. I mean, yeah, I mean, it is absolutely an issue, and you can see this as you drive on the roads. I'm trying to. What was the number of your question again?
Well, there's an issue. I think we all see it with regard to the work that's undertaken by utility companies and road authorities, and the quality of the work that's undertaken. It seems that minimising the cost is the main purpose. Whereas, would you not agree that maximising the quality of the work should be more important? And how do you make sure that happens?
I certainly will defer to colleagues on this, but I mean, I agree with the point you're trying to make.
I don't think there's any doubt that the public consider that the quality of reinstatements, whether it be by utility companies or roads authorities, could be better. There are good examples out there, but what we have to get to is where it's much better than it is at the moment, or the perception is it's much better at the moment. We know through the Transport Scotland bill at the moment there'll be increased powers for Angus Carmichael as the Roadworks Commissioner, and we fully support that. I mentioned earlier about the training programme we're going to have for our road workers. Throughout Scotland, so the 32 authorities will have a consistent way of dealing with reinstatements. Because if you get your reinstatement correct, it makes it easier in the long run for it to last that much longer. I suppose it also touches on the budgets that we have. Our budgets are generally reactive budgets. What we'd like to be able to do once utilities or roadworks have been undertaken on a location, we'd like to surface that road, and if we were able to do that with bigger budgets, then that degree of poor condition would be taken away. There was some talk mentioned about the procurement method. Well, I can assure you within local authorities we do include a degree of quality in our bids, whether that be for large contracts or for small contracts. So it's not necessarily the lowest price wins. It might well be the lowest price does win, but there has to be a degree of quality. You have to make sure that the contractor undertaking the job, undertaking the works for our roadworks or our roads authority, is good at doing their work. I can't speak for the utilities. They've got their own procurement process, but we've got the same rules for reinstatement, and the Roadworks Commissioner will hopefully get increased powers to take appropriate action.
Trunk roads, cost or quality?
So we are in the process of procuring our next operating company contracts for the South East and the South West. They're known as network maintenance contracts, where previously they were described as 4G for those who follow that, and the current incumbents are Scotland Transerve and Amy. As we're going through that procurement exercise, we've placed a higher emphasis on quality versus cost. For 4G, the proportion was 80-20. That was 80 in cost, 20% in quality. We have changed that to 60 on price and 40 in quality for this procurement we're going through just now. Furthermore, one of the big things that we have promoted within this procurement is the customer. We're making this, now we do customer care, we could do it better, I accept that. We need to do it better, and that's one of the things we've put right at the heart of these contracts is the customer. From the customer from an old lady in a village, because we've talked about active travel, trunk roads in villages are local roads, but right through to big business as well. So we've put a requirement on the incoming contractors to put the customer at the focus of what they do.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to the next question, and John, if you'd like to lead off on that.
It's a very brief question. I maybe ask it in two parts to the two different, if I may.
Maybe one person from each group could answer it.
Yes, indeed. Maybe for COSLA, Mr Nicholl, a number of local authorities have declared climate emergencies. Can you outline the steps that will be taken to minimise the climate impact of road repairs, please?
On a technical level, I suspect my learned colleagues to the left and right can probably talk about how they deal with the impact of maintenance on roads in a warmer, wetter world, potentially. In terms of COSLA's role, recognising utterly what you've said, we've taken steps to think quite deeply about how we respond to an emergency situation in terms of climate change. We've debated this a few times at our board level that Councillor Heddle chairs, and what we're trying to do is think about the implications of climate change on all local government policy and services, which would include transport and road maintenance. There isn't a kind of concrete answer response I can give to you on what we will do, but I think to give the assurance we are thinking about that, and that will be something that we will want to consider carefully in the months and years ahead. Most of our papers with regard to this are public and are on our website, and are there to be looked at. But if there's a specific follow-up, I'm more than happy to try and answer that.
Thank you. I'd now like to direct the same question to Transport Scotland, but prior to answering, perhaps I could add a supplementary, and that is from your very helpful evidence. And if I quote here, we have undertaken a collaborative review of our national transport strategy to set out a compelling vision for the kind of transport system we want for Scotland over the next 20 years, one that protects our climate and improves lives. Could you maybe outline how maintaining the same road building programme with £6 billion on 2 roads is going to improve, protect our climate? And can you also maybe answer the specific question about the impact of road maintenance, please?
Well, I can certainly, thanks Mr Finney, I can certainly answer that from the road maintenance perspective, being my own area, and it comes back to what Hugh was saying earlier about the network maintenance contracts and how we intend to go forward and the requirements that we've built into that. We're obviously acutely aware of the climate emergency, and in terms of how we might address that or mitigate the impacts, we've set various requirements into the contracts. For example, our operating companies, as you might imagine, have quite large fleets of vehicles. So we've set targets there in terms of ultra-low emission vehicles. So on day one of the contract, which will be next August, we've mandated that at least 10% of the vehicles are ultra-low emission vehicles. And by 2025, at least 50% of their fleet should be ultra-low emission vehicles. So these are specific requirements that we've set in the contract, and they're minimums, obviously. We've also set key performance indicators in the contract, which are measured on an ongoing basis. So we track the progress that they will make in meeting those particular requirements. So that's one example, is ultra-low emission vehicles. We've also set key requirements in terms of carbon reduction. So our operating companies on day one of the contract are required to set a baseline for their carbon footprint for all the operations that they undertake. So we'll have a year one carbon footprint. They're then required to reduce that carbon footprint over the life of the contract, so that there'll be performance indicators set within the contract to measure the reduction in the carbon footprint, and performance against that is linked to payment. So if they're doing well in that respect, then obviously their payments aren't affected. But if they fall behind on that, then there are payment reductions from the amount of money that's paid to them. So it's incentivised, if you like, the carbon reduction. So these are specific examples going forward for the whole 3,500 kilometres of the trunk road network in terms of how we might mitigate the impacts. These are obviously key ones in terms of the fleet. We've also set performance indicators for recycling of materials. So again, and that's linked to payment as well, and also reuse of waste materials, which they can reuse within their operations. So these are quite specific requirements that we've set out and will be monitored through KPIs.
Thank you for that, and I appreciate we're here to discuss road maintenance. I wonder then how you will have to offset that against the conflicting evidence that we get about the road building programme. Is the road building programme under review or not under review?
The road building programme, as you would describe it, is under review, and that's through, we've talked about the National Transport Strategy, and as colleagues from Scots have referred to, is the Strategic Transport Project Review, which will be the follow-on, and that will determine where the Scottish Government will take forward its transport infrastructure planning and delivery. So that part of the road building programme, as you describe it, will be taken as part of a consideration of that. What I would say is that the programme for government, and I realise, Chair, that we're here to talk about maintenance, but there's a clear indication for the First Minister around the promotion of active travel and a move to seriously change the mode take-up by the promotion of bus. And obviously, as Transport Scotland, we will need to be playing our part of that delivery.
For the avoidance of doubt, I acknowledge that, but clearly, you know, that's a very bold statement from the government's people responsible for the government's transport programme, and all these will have to be offset. So, just for the avoidance of doubt, Mr Willis, you're head of roads, is there a review of whether we're going to continue with the dualling of the A9 and the 96?
What I will say is that all of this is up for debate as part of the Strategic Transport Projects Review.
A very good probing question.
With respect, I thought quite a simple question. That's a yes or a no. Is it up for review or not, Mr Willis?
I think, in fairness, I think, in fairness, that is a question for the Minister when they come in. I think you may struggle to get. Can I just ask a question just on the we've had examples there from other people regarding climate change emergency and what's being done. Ewan, do you want to just give me an example of what you're doing and why you think you're responding to it?
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, from the Scots perspective, we very much are sharing knowledge across the 32 authorities about what individuals are doing. It does reflect a lot of what Donald's already described in terms of that move to a different type of vehicles, because we tend to own and operate our own vehicle fleet anyway that actually undertakes the road maintenance activities within the local authority area. So we have a direct ability to actually move to those different types of vehicles. A number of authorities also, when they're specifying the types of materials we're going to buy in, looking at different, I think other colleagues have given evidence already to the committee about the use of a warm mix as opposed to a hotter mix in terms of what goes in the back of the vehicles that then go out to undertake the resurfacing. Increasing use of technology about how you actually deploy your workforce to different locations in terms of workforce planning, how you get them there. So that, you know, that's all built in, or, you know, and that's been shared within our working groups within the Scots network, which look at these things on a regular basis. So there's all of those elements that are being built in as well. So it reflects the similar approaches that Transport Scotland are building into their revised contracts.
Okay. Thank you. We have now come to the end of this session. I'd like to thank you all for the evidence you've been given. It's very interesting. And I'll just say to committee members, thank you all for getting your constituency questions off your chest during this session, because it's something we try. Well, thank you, Mike, for not doing it. And I'm briefly going to suspend the meeting for 5 minutes to allow the witnesses to depart. Thank you.